All right, so we're back, and we are not going to have adequate time to cover all the crazy, dumb bullshit that happened in the last week. So we'll just start with what's been trending today, which luckily we didn't record last night, so we weren't able to talk about the empty shelves Biden hashtag that went up today. Which, if
Oh
you've
my
been
God.
to, I don't know, any grocery store anywhere in the United States, you've noticed that there's one or two empty shelves. So it resonates, as you might say.
Might have something to do with the hundreds of ships that were stuck off port.
Indeed, it might.
And
Well, I
don't
mean,
worry though,
it's
don't
not
worry.
just
Here,
that.
here, Biden has hopped in and said that New York and L.A. or whatever, New York and
Well,
California
that's largely
committed to
because Abbott
24/7 operation.
and that's largely because Abbott and DeSantis turned around and said, "That's okay. You guys can come here. We actually have people who are like
Yeah,
capable of getting the job done."
we have competent
So,
workers and unions that don't
yeah.
suck.
Oh,
As
that's an
in none.
interesting point, actually. I learned something about that specifically today. So, it seems that California's put in some new regulations. No. No, really. California put in new regulations. I understand that's a little bit
This
of a
is a stretch,
stretch.
man.
I know. Regulations in California. But anyway, so they put in these new regulations, and you can't be an owner operator basically at all. Like, if you want to go to any of their big city ports or state distribution centers or any of that, you can't be an owner operator and work there. There are fleets of
Really?
trucks just ready to go,
Well,
ready to fucking go,
so
that legally cannot do a damn thing in California.
here's something you're forgetting, and this is very important. Even if you want to dust off the deck down there, you can't do it anymore because you're not allowed to use the fucking blowers.
Well, no, that's not true. I don't think that takes place
Because
until
none of them are fucking
2024.
electric. None of them are electric.
But that being said, yeah, that's another one, and I really do think it's 2024, and that is like no time at all.
It, it doesn't matter. I can guarantee you there's some prick down there who's probably already turned it into a union rule.
Probably. I mean, that's
You
kind
know,
of what.
But
because then they can throw their
all,
hands up.
all
Ah,
I
I guess we
all I
can't
can
work
say
today.
is
Mm.
I speaking as a libertarian and deeply glad that Penn stood by Gavin Newsom's side and said, "Yeah, we did."
Did he?
I
Wow.
think I hope that he saw those things pass and said, "Yes, this is the libertarian future I dream of."
Speaking of we did it, here you go. You can
Oh.
crop out that little bit. You can crop that
Oh
bit out and
yeah.
post it on the show art.
Yeah, I've seen that. Just a lovely image of a Venezuelan shelf, except it's not in Venezuela. It's here in America.
You know, at
Well,
least
I
under
mean,
Trump, like it was just the Lysol and toilet paper that was gone. With Biden and Harris, it's everything else.
Yeah, it's like, oh,
I,
hey, that
I mean,
sucks. I can't buy
this
toilet
is
paper. At least I'll
the
get some
problem,
eggs and
right?
coffee.
Like we knew this, we talked about this a long time ago. One of the
Hmm.
biggest problems that the United States has is that we shipped all of our manufacturing overseas, which means we don't make a damn thing in this country anymore, which has gutted the middle class in terms of their overall jobs, which is why nobody has any money and everybody's sitting there and bitching about the fact that they have to work at Starbucks and Burger King, right? Now, the other problem that we have is that if you happen to do an upending of the economy and screw up the entire supply chain, your lean, your Six Sigma operating processes, this, you know, pillar of efficiency that we were prior to the pandemic, you screw that up, and it takes months. It'll probably take years to recover because it took decades to develop that system.
Oh, well,
And
I
you're
know a
gonna have
great
these
shortcut.
shortages and cascading failures.
Man,
Like you're not going to be able to get it.
check this out. I've got such a good idea. This is like a shortcut to reset the whole system, get it back working. What we do,
Is it a great reset?
maybe, but what we can do is we can take all those remaining employees, all the ones that are still employed, all our, heroes that went to like New York City to save lives during the height of the pandemic. What we can do, check it out, is, and even if they've been infected already too, what we can do is we'll tell them all to get vaccinated. Isn't it genius? And
Yeah.
then that way, everybody will be safe from everybody, and we can just start going
Yep.
back to everything right away.
You know what? That just sounds crazy enough to work. I bet that works just about as well as taxing more people to change the weather.
Well, hey, now, if we
Well,
raise the
actually, that's
taxes
the
according to
one.
Janet Yellen, then the corporation, well, according to both Janet Yellen and, the noted economist Jen Psaki,
Oh boy.
obviously, if you raise the taxes, the corporations are happy to take on that burden. They're glad to.
Of
They're
course.
like,
And
oh
Janet
no,
Yellen
we're
needs
good with the
to.
taxes. No, we will not. Will not pass them on to the consumer.
Janet Yellen needs to jump off a very fucking tall bridge.
I mean,
Like,
anybody,
goddamn, man.
Not the one
anybody at the
directly
Fed,
above the money pit that
anyone at
she
the
has,
Fed.
by the by. Just to say.
That is a biased laundry basket.
So, yeah,
Go
and I
fold the
mean,
clothes, and it's all my wife's clothes. This is just terrible.
oh, speaking of terrible, some really bad news. It appears that just in the past few hours, Bill Clinton got a blood infection. So what we're thinking is that he probably, was fed a batch that was tainted. Because, I mean, you got to have your
It sounds like
adrenochrome.
the suicide hotline got another order placed.
Mm-hmm. Could be.
I mean,
He'll probably have woken up from his coma having strangled himself in the nasal cannula.
you can.
Well,
you
is it
can,
strangulation if, you tied the cord to, like, your bedpost? Is that the same?
I'm just gonna throw it out there, right? I think you got your order of operations wrong, there, Evan. You said that
do
he
tell.
had a batch that was tainted. I think that he had a taint that was batched.
Maybe. There's probably a foreskin joke in there too if we
Craig
really
got
wanted
it.
to reach for it.
Got it.
Ah. And of course, also today we had oh no, it wasn't James O'Keefe himself, but it was like one of the reporters from Veritas met the director of Pfizer's, like one of the ones that was quoted as saying, "We can't let this shit get out." I've never seen a fat woman run so fast. I'll put a link in here for you guys because
you've never put a cake in front of them on a treadmill.
Fair. But it's a short little. It's like a 1-minute video. It's you can watch it now or later or whatever. But I want to make sure that everybody that gets a chance to listen does have a chance to check it out because it's just excellent.
Is it now?
Oh, really? I mean, it really is. It encourages. What was it? Yeah, Vanessa Gelman, their director of worldwide research.
So is this like the Hungarian or no? It's the Belgian health minister who's looks like it's 4 or 5 health ministers that merged into one.
Nah, she's only really about 1.5 women.
Okay.
That is terrible.
So she's like menopause, not menostop.
Yeah. More pear-shaped, less blueberry, as it were. But
not menace slam the brakes. Oh, there she goes. Yeah, it only takes like 5 seconds, Steve. You can watch it just for 5 there.
I'll get to it. I promise.
Yeah, no rush. But as I said before we got on, also Don Lemon had a chance to talk to Sanjay Gupta, who, as we all know, went on Joe Rogan just the other day. I'll go ahead and put a link to the short thing here, so if you guys want to check that out, you can.
Yeah, Sanjay got his ass torn in half.
Yeah.
Rogan laid into him, and
I have not seen the entire Rogan interview. I have.
It is brutal that Sanjay is just fucking deer in headlights. He is caught and
there's something incredible that's revealed in that, and I'll admit I haven't caught the whole thing. I've got bits and pieces because I kind of don't watch Rogan anymore because when something isn't recorded live, you can't actually verify anything. But anyway, that aside, his words to him were really specific. And entertaining. Like, dude, you guys totally lied about me and took glee in it. Now, I've paraphrased like a 2-minute conversation between the two guys, but it's 3 hours. It's worth your time to actually check out because Sanjay is basically excoriated. But the biggest thing that comes from this, and if I'm not mistaken, Sanjay's married. Like, he has a family. But the biggest thing that comes from this, in his own words, his own article that he wrote after this is, I don't think I've ever had a conversation that long with anyone.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of saying, I've only had conversations like this with my wife or with my mother or my father, I don't think I've ever had a conversation this long. This man is supposed to be CNN's head of medicine? Seriously? What the hell?
Well, when you read the entire article, it's filled with all kinds of weird stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's just one example. It's like, this guy is a fucking weird human being.
For a whole 3 hours.
What was it? Was another one was I bought a mask, a Joe Rogan mask, and I handed it to him, and he looked confused. And you're like, well, yeah, because you literally bought his own merch, and then you gave him his own merch, which A, he probably has, and B, that doesn't change his opinion, because when you happen to be a capitalist, just because you're a capitalist and you may oppose certain individual actions, that does not inherently mean you won't sell those things specifically to people who want to buy them.
I mean, there was a whole bunch of male tears mugs that were getting sold by a bunch of dudes to feminists, and they were raking in the bucks and having a hearty laugh at it.
Oh, yes.
Were there really?
Oh, yeah. That's actually where one of the main sources for male tears mugs was.
Really?
I mean, there were others. There were, like, legit ones that actually hated men, but a bunch of it was, like, a bunch of trolls that were just like, I'm going to make a quick buck off a bunch of dumb feminists.
It continues to be a easy thing to do these days.
Yeah, I mean, it is a golden age for grift.
All those shirts for young girls that say, boys suck, throw rocks at them. Shit like that. The funniest thing is those are readily available on Zazzle. A service that I am liking less and less these days. It's a place where you can design your own products and they get sent to you by cheap immigrant labor. But they have policies against gender discrimination. If you put a shirt on there that said "girls suck, throw rocks at them," had a little boy throwing a rock to the side, it'd be gone in an instant. You go there and type in "boys suck, throw rocks at them," and you'll get pages, multiple pages.
I'll bet you could do the same thing with whites and not with blacks.
Oh, you want to see some horrible shit? Type that kind of stuff in.
Yeah, I believe it. I absolutely believe it. Huh.
It's like going to Patreon and typing in the gamer words.
The what?
Gamer words.
Think George Carlin in the 7 words.
Except then extend that to racial epithets.
Yeah, modernize it basically.
And you'll find all kinds of stuff on there that you think would fall under violations that are tossed, but apparently not.
Yeah, it's really weird how that works out.
I'm gonna go get some chips. Sorry, I just saw some Chipotle hot salsa, and there's nothing that I love more than Chipotle hot salsa.
Don't forget to take your Chipotle away.
I do like the burn in the morning. Although it is really like it's not so bad when you go to work because you get kind of primed and you get in there and you're like, all right, time to make my first pit stop of the day.
Oh right, yeah. I mean, when you got a full shift job, you gotta do that sort of thing.
That's exactly right.
I mean, you're working 8 hours a day at a minimum. I mean, you can't give them all 8.
Speaking of such things, so listen, I don't know if you guys saw the
time is a real thing that people pay for. At least they pay for my engineered thinking time because shit shows up before it's due.
So here's the question on that one is exactly how much is it that you deposit for the children at school?
Well, it all depends.
What
depends indeed.
How many Katie Courics would you say that is?
Ah,
Because I don't know if you
I don't
guys
know.
saw, but the literal measure for fecal mass herself uh, was found out to have omitted certain things by the notorious RBG
Indeed.
with regards to Black Lives Matter and national anthem protests.
Yes.
Yeah, about how
And how crazy that is that her reputation needed to be preserved so pristinely, and that with her journalistic integrity, she chose to edit history to a certain degree, if you'd say.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think
How
this is
crazy,
kind of
how
really getting
quaint.
this is hitting the real core problem that we're facing today is the left has largely chosen to not represent reality. They have
Like,
chosen
that's full on
to.
fucking 1984 bullshit, is what she
Well,
pulled.
I mean, yeah, but that's not the only time, right? What was it? There was
Well, of
one that
course
was
not.
the
Like,
other.
it's a blatant and admitted, more importantly, example.
Yeah,
Like,
well,
Yeah, I mean,
this
used
thing
to be they were
goes,
classy about it. They would at least be like, "No, I would never do that." I mean, even though they obviously didn't, you all know it's like, well, yeah, but I mean, at least I'm going to play the game and lie to you. Here, it's like, oh yeah, no, I absolutely did. Fuck you.
this is a dog walking in, taking a shit on the rug, and then wiping its ass on it, staring at you and smiling. Except it's not like your dog, and it's also not a cute dog.
Accurate,
I mean,
accurate.
I don't know, Brett. I've gotten to the point where it's absolutely fascinating that the people who are, purportedly, they're more than willing to come at you and tell you that you're crazy and you're a conspiracy theorist. And
Oh
half
yeah,
the
they
time they have
gaslight
no
all the time.
fucking data, right? They have no data. They have nothing backing their point of view. I spent a weekend, this past weekend, arguing with some idiot who, he turned around. We started with the premise of there's no long-term studies. We all agree that there's no long-term studies on the vaccines, right? And he sits there and says that you have no scientific basis to have concerns. I'm like, well, we
What?
just started with there's no long-term studies, so that's a basis to have a concern.
And,
And it got worse from there.
Well, not
And
only
then he
that, I
turned
was
mean,
around.
this person supposed to be an engineer or a scientist, or is this person
No. Actually,
just
that
like a
was the
guy?
funniest part, right? That was the funniest part because he turns around and says, "You're not a fucking doctor." I'm like, "Yes, that's correct. I am not a doctor. However, I am a chemical engineer who started as a biological engineer and been working as a nuclear engineer and then getting my master's in nuclear engineering. I am very familiar with all of the sciences, and I can
Yeah.
come to pretty good judgment reading scientific papers." He goes, "Well, you're not a fucking doctor, therefore you don't know what the hell you're talking about."
Oh
I'm like,
God, who the
you're
fuck do
not
they
a
think
you're
that
not a
doctors go
anything,
to?
motherfucker. Like,
Does this guy think like that a doctor uh, created a CT? Like, does he think doctors like sit there and manufacture the MRIs that he gets put into to look at his puny pea-sized fucking brain?
this is what I've seen with the epistemic
Do you think the
trespass
doctors put
crowd.
together the X-ray machine? Jesus
Well,
Christ!
and that's kind of the thing is that this is the epistemic trespass crowd, and the epistemic trespass crowd is absolutely convinced that you can't argue with them unless you happen to be an expert in the field, and if you don't happen to be an expert in a field that agrees with them, then you're sitting there and spreading disinformation. And this
But
is
here's the
how it
other
works
thing:
all the
like
time.
an
But what these
engineer,
motherfuckers don't
it's to
understand
your
is science
competence.
is science.
It's to your competence as an engineer. If you're a competent engineer, you know your realms of competence, and you will either defer to better expertise, or you will give your limitations at the front. It's straightforward.
Well,
Anytime I've
there
had to go
there's more
outside of
to
my
it than
bounds
that.
here, I've kind of had to like couch it in some caveats, and then give my own little details about my guesses versus my knowns and unknowns. Like
At,
it's
at, at this point,
which
at
I'm
this
certain
point
you
in
did
my
in conversation.
development, well, I mean, you can only do so much on Twitter.
To what,
But at this point,
to the
right,
degree that he understood what the fuck you're talking about anyway.
I have a solid coverage of biology, chemistry, and physics. Solid coverage of them. Plus, I know how to do the
etc.
mathematics associated with it. The end result is not necessarily that I know everything that there is. If you sat there and you cold cocked me and walked up to me on the street and asked me to explain how, some fucking random piece of shit works, right? I'm not going to be able to tell you. And I'm going to tell you I don't know. I'll have to go look it up. But at the same time, because I have that solid basis with all of the major disciplines of science and the mathematics background, and because I do a shitload of research on my own, getting shit hot on a specific issue takes me very little time, right?
Yeah.
So I can actually sit down and read a bunch of papers and draw a conclusion from the quality of the work and the quality of the papers, even though I'm not an expert in that specific field. Now,
Or the
when you
absolute
start
lack of
talking about
quality in the
vaccines,
papers.
well, that's
No.
kind of the point. Is you can start sitting there and going, "What the fuck? Why is it that you have? Why is it that the CDC drew an inference on natural immunity using a sample size of 200 some odd people who were supposedly vaccinated or whatever, and the effect size, the actual like proportion of those people who should have gotten sick anyways is like 3 of them. You can't draw an inference from an actual like 3 case study. Like you just can't do that. Shit like that. Like it doesn't take a lot for somebody who is already trained to get further trained into a specific area. Again, that's not a large spectrum, but you talk to these people and you talk to the folks who are doing the Katie Couric bullshit and their editing of their reality, and they are absolutely convinced that unless you are an expert in something and agree with them, you can't have any idea what you're talking about, and therefore they don't have to listen to anybody else other than whatever exists inside their head.
Well, you see, I was talking to someone earlier on Zatwatters, and they mentioned progressive, and I had to point out that progressives never were about progressing anything, other than progressing towards a homogeneity which agrees with them as they already are. Like that's what it is.
That's an interesting way to phrase it.
It's what it is. They say they're willing to change, then they fucking don't. They say that they're racist and they acknowledge it, and then they stop there instead of actually changing their entire life to suit their espoused worldview. It's like, just, the fuck's wrong with these people? They say, oh, we're going to occupy this area until the bankers agree with us, and then the bankers say, Gay Pride Day, and then they're all done.
I love Coca-Cola now.
Right. It's, just how fucking and then they had this Dave Chappelle on Netflix. They had all the trans people working there, and their quote allies walked out. I started thinking, what, all 10 of them, huh? It's and someone said that as if if there's even that many. I was adding in the allies and rounding up.
I have some at home. Thank you.
Someone got a present.
Well, I mean, I got my chips. I said I wanted chips so I can shovel Chipotle into my face, right? And I got some goddamn chips to shovel Chipotle in my face. Like, I have very simple needs, and usually it involves chip and Chipotle hot sauce.
I think we're kind of losing you there.
I mean,
he's come back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was probably crinkle into the chip bag.
This is, I actually, that's a very interesting perspective. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were being drowned out for a bit there.
I think that's a really interesting perspective that I hadn't quite, like, I mean, I've said similar, I've said similar, or I've thought similar concepts that basically, like, this is the progressive wokeness has in any way, shape, or form, but it's basically existing without actually having to do anything to earn that value.
Well, it's
and then
virtue signaling is what it turns into.
Pay them for it.
Yeah, it's virtue signaling. It's social justice warrioring. And people don't quite get the idea, like, that social justice as a concept before SJWs became a thing was kind of like a rational precept that, yeah, there should be some sort of, like, the justice in court should extend out into society. Fine. That, basically we should comport ourselves in such a way that we expect to find in the justice system. I get that too. But then we have these people come on, and social justice warriors are just an extension of keyboard warriors. The etymology here is idiots posting on a forum like they're going to be a crusader, and then they stop and they're done for the day.
Well, I think what ended up happening, right, is you take a look back to the 60s and the 70s, and you had the civil rights movement. And that was a real movement with real people who faced real inequality, right?
Yeah, they
And
faced
what's ended up
Democrats in the
happening,
Senate.
Fair,
let's
yeah.
not get political of the specific parties here.
Okay, fine. They
But
faced filibuster in the Congress.
the point is that back then they had real stuff that they were fighting for, and those organizations that were fighting for those things never went away. They won. They won
Right.
across the board. They got everything that they wanted, right?
And then they turned
The
evil.
people who were raking. Well, I don't think it's that. They have to justify their existence, right? That's the problem that you run into.
Well, my favorite thing
Right?
to ask them is what. My favorite thing to ask a lot of these activists is what legal right does Group X that you're fighting for not have that everyone else has? What legal right? What is missing in the law that will make them equal with everyone else?
Hello, excuse me.
Yep.
Women choose to have children and raise them, so obviously they are being discriminated against.
Hold on. Point of privilege, birthing persons.
Oh.
Fuck off, Tommy.
Oh, okay, yeah, whatever.
God, I remember. Do you guys remember that national conference, right? The fucking
That's
point of
exactly
privilege
right.
shit just wouldn't, like, the 10 fucking minutes of that shit. Just every autist in the crowd had to stand up and have their speech.
It's.
I'm sorry, you must
stunning.
resent that.
In this. Oh no, not at all. I don't.
Oh, okay then.
Any way, shape, or form. But this is fundamentally the problem. Is I think that a lot of these folks they sit there. That you have the civil rights groups that never went away. Jesse Jackson, he turned winning the civil rights war into a 40-year career of making millions and millions of dollars.
Here's the
Right?
thing. He wasn't like the guy either, but he pretends he is.
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. He walked. He did a couple marches.
Oh,
When
yeah.
we're talking about Jesse Jackson, he was the anti-Semite in Crown Heights.
Oh, yeah, I mean, he's your classic
he turned around
grifter.
And he said every nasty thing that he could think of that was said towards black people, and he directed that kind of rhetoric directly at Jews at the end. He just decided to pass the spit down the bucket.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the problem that you get, right? Is that those groups never went away. They figured out a way to make a shitload of money because there's a whole lot of. Basically, what ends up happening is these people go out and there's a whole army of individuals who don't feel particularly accomplished in their life. And why would you? Accomplishment is hard. It requires actually getting up off your. These people who have no accomplishments, no nothing. Like, they haven't invested their money properly. They haven't worked particularly hard. They
Invested. Most of these people don't even have like 2 accounts.
Well, most of them
What kind of accounts?
Well, I mean, like savings and checking separately at one bank.
Oh, you get savings and checking anyway at every bank. You just open.
If you don't put money in one of them, it might as well not be there. Trust me.
That's true. Speaking
Until
of somebody
overdraft.
Actually, I think I have negative money right now. As part of the buying of the house, I accidentally overpaid my bills. I was kind of pissed. I was like, oh, here's some debt. I'll just throw this at this. And all of a sudden, they cashed a check that I'd sent them 3 weeks earlier. I was pissed.
Oops.
But none of these people have accomplished anything. They don't have. They have no money. They have no skills. They have no personal development. You look at the news headlines right now, and we're sitting there and we're seeing that 30% of men under the age of 30 have never gotten laid. Right? These aren't people who are forming long-term relationships and long-term bonds, and they're jealous. And so somebody comes to them and says, you know what? The reason that you don't have a lot of money is because the white people did it to you. Right? The reason that you're not getting laid is because men are sexist.
Nah, I disagree. I think what happens is someone shows up one day and comes up to them and says, "Excuse me, sir, you look like a perfect gentleman. Would you like these car keys?"
Okay.
And then the joke goes away.
Hmm.
Yeah, I didn't get it.
Elliot Rodger, good God, man.
I don't know who that is. Is that like Mr. Rogers?
That's
You know,
pretty
you know,
esoteric, man.
yes,
I got to be honest.
Mr. Rogers. There you go. You never, you
Well, I
wouldn't
mean,
recognize I'm a perfect gentleman.
well, you could always say that. I mean, it was a beautiful day in his neighborhood.
Yeah. But in any case,
Why wouldn't any
all these
woman want to
people
be with me? I'm a perfect gentleman.
I think that's, and I'm not talking about guys, right? You see the same thing with
I know,
the
you're talking
feminists
about
who are
people.
writing about their dating problems, right? Like this is not a unilateral one sex one race thing, and when you turn around and you have the folks who are selling this line of crap to the black people, and the folks who are selling this line of crap to the women, and then all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of other people who are male and white who turn around and say, well, shit, this doesn't help me at all. They say, well, no. You're oppressed by the patriarchy, too. And racism is also helping to keep you down.
That's got to be the
if it was a more
funniest shit.
equitable system.
Listening to a male feminist, and I would repeat myself and say future rapist, but listening to male feminists talk about how the patriarchy oppresses them, too. Like, just, dude, you're not going to get any, and if you do, you're going to get put in jail.
I don't even think that all of them are attempting to get it. I think that, honestly, this is a whole bunch of impotent failures that haven't accomplished anything, and then they're trying to sit there and figure out why.
Well, like Flower Girls figured out in the 60s that if they're braiding your hair, they're trying to get in the back door. I'm wondering why the hell can't like, have these stories not passed down the sorority far enough?
Well, you see, with the sorority, you've got to actually, talk to each other.
Okay.
And if you were to put something like this on the internet, well, it's just going to get shut down. So, I mean,
they all have
no.
They all have the second string contingent. They all have the girl they call in to end the date. It's not like they don't have people who could carry the message on. They all have their 6-year sisters there too, the ones who are never going to get the degree, but they're fun to hang out with.
Right. But above and beyond that, so let's see. I think this was either today or yesterday, but Sotomayor was just commenting on how sad we are because we had recently just talked about RBG and how Katie Couric just utterly lied about how she thought that. Well, to put it shortly, that they shouldn't be kneeling
for the national anthem.
Yeah. But above and beyond that, Sotomayor...
The nation that they live in.
Yeah, kind of the place that you live where people spilled their blood and, lost their lives to make you free. But anyway, Sotomayor, he was lamenting on that, and one of his biggest thoughts, one of his real most important remembrances was that she was the court's only civil rights lawyer. Unfortunately, that kind of forgets about Justice Thomas, who was like the head of the
How about that?
EEOC, that's kind of the largest civil rights organization that exists at all in America for like 8 years.
Funny.
I mean,
the justice on the court
let the narrative.
Well, I find it a bit ironic that the one justice on the court from Sotomayor's era that definitely would have benefited from some sort of equal rights or civil rights watchdog in his own ascent to the seat. Thomas would be that guy, huh? It's a damn shame that he got put through what he did.
Yeah, it's a real shame that Joe Biden called him a... Anyway.
Right. Yeah, people forget about these things. Little details,
Yeah, he did not say super predator.
There was a whole bunch of people for a while that were saying the first woman on the Supreme Court was RBG, and it wasn't. It was whoever was put in by Reagan, right?
Right.
Now that's kind of
you shouldn't worry about ideologues getting facts right, because facts are inconveniences, not basis for reality. If you believe in something strongly enough.
Oh, yeah, I mean, just along that exact line, we can look back and see that, the blackwashing of an originally white character like Black Panther, something like that. Or then when they'll just say, "Oh, there's no such thing as Blade. There's no Blade the vampire," and they're just these
Wait,
people, they just don't know.
Black Panther was blackwashed?
Oh yeah, he was originally a white dude. Yeah, South
What?
African, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, yeah, you didn't know? Wow, yeah, back in the old days,
I did not.
golden age of comics. Yeah,
That should be a comic that you post somewhere.
yeah, Silver Age, as a matter of fact, like early Batman stuff. But yeah, he was a white guy. And then it's like we'll rewrite him so that we can apply to that demographic. And I mean, honestly, it's not a bad idea. He was no Luke Cage. He wasn't like cool like that guy, but whatever.
I mean,
Never mind an
I
original
fail to
black character.
I fail to recognize any superheroes as particularly super outside of Iron Man, so that's part of the problem.
I can't say
Iron
I'm
Man is
entirely
amazing.
surprised by that.
Everybody else accomplished nothing. There's no personal growth. They just woke up. Like, seriously, the Hulk, honestly, he just basically walked into a fucking hot cell and said, "Oops," and now he's fucking fine. No. If we could do that.
Well,
I
you
should,
make a
I
fair
should
point, and
potentially
I
start
would
that.
actually give you the argument of the Punisher, but he doesn't. But he's not a superhero, so you're absolutely right.
He is
No,
not.
he's just a genuine American hero.
He is.
Granted, I do prefer all Marvel characters to most of DC's characters. Because
that's reasonable.
anybody
Well, for
who
the longest time, Marvel
anybody
was
who
actually
writes
not
Superman-
garbage too. So
Yeah, there was that.
was past
Well, they can
tense.
actually write complex characters, right? Every single one of their superheroes
Could.
has personal flaws.
Well, the
they
guy
have
that
to
wrote
deal
them
with.
is dead. The guy that wrote them all is dead.
That's
Every
true.
character worth a damn was made by him, and now he's not here. Not even no more cameos either. Very sad. But then again, I'm happy that he's not alive to see what's happening.
Yeah.
I thought he was on board with the woke train.
He was a fairly forward-thinking guy in every generation.
Are we
Yeah,
talking
he
about
went through-
Stan?
We're talking about Stan.
Okay. Well,
Fairly
Stan's like
forward-
your old school liberal. Stan's like
Wonder
a
Woman was a paragon of first and second wave feminism, if you will.
like Wonder Woman was
Wonder
always
Woman
meant to
is
be a
DC.
beautiful woman.
Right.
Wonder
That's
Woman
the
is
thing.
DC.
It wasn't. You get the point I'm going at here, though. It's the same era of comic creators.
Yeah, it's basically back
Once
before
you
everything was
started on
paused quite to death. Oh, and speaking of positivity, I know you guys heard about the totally not a sick out that happened at Southwest over the weekend.
Look, there was some bad weather over Kansas. All right.
Yeah,
That stopped
From what?
planes everywhere. It was that bad in Kansas. It stopped planes on both coasts.
From what I've been seeing, is it seems that there's a whole lot of people who are fed up, but it's not organized, which is unfortunate.
Well,
that's
well,
how
the thing about that
grassroots
is it could or couldn't be, because based on the nature of their agreements with the airlines, they can't legally organize to do this.
Oh, unions can't, but employees can, quote, not organize.
Correct. And the union agreements are basically that this is the one thing we won't do. We can organize, but we can't have strikes. Which, timing's very convenient. But on that convenient timing...
Trust an organization like a union to abide by its contracts to the letter of convenience.
As they are wont to do. Or likely, I should say, not want to do. But I just linked something up here in our chat, but it would appear that just yesterday, American Airlines had to cancel about 300 of its flights. And then...
Well, see, that's the thing. This is the kind of stuff. What Southwest happened, because it made the news and because they denied it, that's very likely to spread.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, see, the thing about it is, they could have addressed these issues. Southwest could have taken the out that Abbott gave him. And they kind of halfway did, but it's like, well, I don't really like the decree that was given by the skin suit, but he did say the words and not actually put out any legally binding stuff, so I had to do it. And then, it's like, well, but now we're not going to.
I'm still waiting to find out what, and I mentioned this before the show, we're still waiting on guidance. So even when you start talking about the OSHA stuff is one thing. But we
they just finally filed for that today, right?
Right. So I don't know whether the administration is slow walking this. I don't know whether it's going to be a head fake, in some way, shape, or form to see who will comply, along the way. But it's very strange because this was done in a press conference on the 7th or something like that, or the 4th of September. So we're 6 weeks in, and there's been no movement whatsoever.
Oh yeah, I mean, on that very same note, as a matter of fact, I think tomorrow or the next day, Schumer's supposed to finally bring up the Disenfranchisement for the People Act.
Which one's that one?
Oh, that's the one where people are no longer allowed to vote, that they just send their vote to their local politician and have them fill it out.
What?
It's called the For the People Act, H.R. 1.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you basically just sign your name on there, send it to your local politician, and then they fill it out with whatever they think would be most appropriate for who you should vote for. So, if you feel like getting in contact with your representative, tell them that if they're big on disenfranchisement, they hate black people, hate colored people, hate white people, hate everybody really, they should definitely support H.R. 1. If you have a deep-seated hatred of humans, that's your A+ number one way of really subjugating them for pretty much ever, really.
Well, I think so. One of the things that I heard proposed in the podcast that I listened to is that the Republicans should start working towards state leadership and then try to force a constitutional convention, because that'll be easier with the states, because you only need a certain number of states to do that. And then if they manage to pull off a constitutional convention, we could do things like actually make changes, reinforce the Constitution, do that stuff. Because again, you don't need the full. You're not going to need term limits. Yep. Yeah. Well, that won't happen.
Term limits. Like, that shit just needs to happen.
You know what I would love? I would love a balanced budget amendment, a delegation of federal powers to the states, and then term limits would be good. I don't know. I go back and forth on term limits. I got to be the only libertarian that goes back and forth on term limits, because on one hand,
give it long enough, like 20 years, fine. I think that's too long. I think that after 10 years you're expired, but call it 20.
What I would actually really
compromise.
I would actually really like to change it so that we had a longer term in the presidency, so that you stopped having people try to ram shit through day one because they know they're going to be in there only for like 2 years, Joe Biden.
2. Oh, you're adorable.
And yes, I know presidents are typically there for 4, but let's be honest, he'll be removed by Kamala after he gets the 2 point.
I don't even know if he's going to make the 2. I mean, they are just lining so much up.
Because if they remove him prior to him serving the majority of his term, that means that Kamala ends up basically counting as one of her 2 terms for presidency. So if you want to have a solid Kamala, you need to have, where she has the opportunity to serve for 10 years, right? You need to wait until more than 50% of Joe Biden's term is up.
That's a big ask.
I think that what you might see, though, I bet you it might be that he gets impeached by Republicans 2023.
I suspect that's going to happen. Yep.
And removed.
I think that may happen. I actually, when people were initially proposing the strategy to get Trump back in office, I thought it was ridiculous.
Oh God.
Now I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking it actually might happen, because there's no way they're going to let Kamala take over. The Republicans won't.
Well,
And
so Kamala gets
Joe
removed.
Biden is guilty of all kinds of shit right now.
Well, see, there's the other thing too of Nancy Pelosi. Did either of you guys happen to see her meeting with the Pope?
No.
It's absolutely fascinating. So she's met the Pope before, and it's on video. You can check it out. But when she meets the Pope, when she's met him at previous time, when he's just come through and she's just some nobody fucking senator, whatever, from some place, mind you, it's, she is kind of noteworthy here, but to him, she's just some other politician. This time was entirely different. The manner in which they approached each other was very different. She approached him in the way of a leader. So it tells us some very, very interesting things about where she is in the scheme of things right now. She's a lot more powerful than she's letting on. And it also would make sense. It makes sense when you consider a lot of these really insane things that are done that largely only benefit literally crazy people like her. Like, just the shit with Millie, for instance, is a perfect example.
I would caution you. I do not believe that Pelosi is insane, and I think that any Republican who underestimates her is doing them at their own peril.
Oh, no. I mean insane as in like a cartoon supervillain.
Incredibly smart.
I don't know if I would say smart. I would say she's very wily, very cunning, and absolutely cut her throat and completely ruthless.
I think her husband's very, very smart, and she's smart enough to tell him the numbers of the day.
That's a possibility. But either way, during the meeting, it was absolutely telling. Like, she's a lot more powerful than she's letting on. And what that would mean is that if Kamala were to fall out of that vice presidency and directly into the seat of power, she hates Joe Biden. I mean, we all know this. She said it to his fucking face during the debates, or in fewer words than that. But either way, I mean, she doesn't like Joe Biden. She'd be happy to see him gone.
She was the deciding factor on pulling out of Afghanistan, up until it went sideways. Then she had nothing to do with it again.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like she was right there against the vaccines until it backfired right in her face.
Or, I do remember her saying that she was absolutely very much against the Trump vax and would never, ever get the Trump vax. And these days she's saying, you gotta go out there and get your Trump vax. Get that Trump vax. You gotta get the Trump vax, everybody. I don't know is she calling it the Trump vax? I mean, it is the Trump vax, but I wonder if she's calling it that.
I would have loved for Trump to mandate as part of Operation Warp Speed that anything that came out had to come in a golden tipped vial and be called a Trump seed.
On it.
Right, and like that's the only way
that would have been huge.
Gold flakes in the vial, and you got to keep it as a goddamn souvenir at the end.
Absolutely. Well, then you'd be actually winning on two levels then, because then you'd be able to say, "What are you talking about? There's no graphene in there. You can see the gold flakes. They're right there."
It's
there
very
literally
strange
is no graphene, but that's okay.
There are definitely people who are absolutely opposed to the vaccines for political reasons. It's the same motherfuckers, or same type of motherfuckers on the right, who are there on the left, opposing these things solely because it was Trump. And the folks on the right are opposing it solely because it's Biden.
Oh,
There
like
are
Brooklyn
very
Dad
few
Defiant.
people who are rationally evaluating this and sitting there and when Biden comes out and says this is a political thing and none of you deserve any fucking rights, I kind of agree with him, having dealt with these people, but at the same time, like, that's still not fair to go trample this through.
Then you start thinking, what about me? How are my politics going to bite me in the ass today?
Well, and that's kind of the problem is at the end of the day, when you start talking about like how the Democrats fuck this up, It is
Yeah.
they started attacking it in the fall. They started attacking it in the fall, and then B, the
They
second
attacked it
thing
all
that they
summer
did.
long too.
Yeah, the second
Listen, guys,
thing that
just
they
go down to
did,
Chinatown and ask a Chinaman to cough in your throat, okay? Just have him lick you right on the face.
You're a racist
the
if you
second
don't.
thing that they did is they didn't listen to anybody who had legitimate concerns.
Correct. Instead, they drove all of them to the anti-vaxxers, who were more than happy
Yep.
to listen to their concerns because they were getting fucking dollars out of them.
Yep.
It's almost like the U.S. government forgot that half of the transaction, didn't they?
If somebody could come up with a valid reason why the injection of nucleotides into my cells is not going to potentially give me cancer in the future, and why that's somehow a zero risk, as they're so claiming, I would have been more amenable to it. But
Well,
the
they did
reality
that
is
in
they've
the.
decided to just turn
They
around.
did that a couple centuries ago. What does a virus do?
What?
What does a virus do?
No, that's no. No.
Oh no!
There's
I'm
a
fucking coming
difference.
after you for that shit every time you bring it up
Okay.
like that.
All right. The difference
How do you
is
get?
a virus
No, tell me
replicates
this.
until
Tell me
your
this,
cell lyses,
Steve.
and when your cell lyses, it dies.
Tell me this, Steve. How do viral inclusions happen in mammalian cells
Absolutely.
today?
That can happen. That can happen occasionally.
Yes. Now I'm
Right?
willing to cede
But
to you. I'm willing to cede to
that
you
is
directly
not-
that there is a higher
that is
risk of that
not-
happening without apoptosis being a more likely outcome. That's just an obvious fact of the situation.
Yes. That is not so the mRNA vaccines are not intended to lyse the cells, right? Your cells are
Correct.
not going to be replicating an organism.
It is very
intended
much
to kill.
not likely that a cell that includes an mRNA vaccine and then produces the proteins and then the vaccine dies off and goes away. It is more likely than not that those cells survive.
Quick addendum.
To my
Apoptosis is, for anybody that doesn't know, cell death, and that's just the normal process.
It's cell seppuku.
Yeah. Cells get old and are no longer useful and self-terminate. Anyway, I just wanted to put that in there because there's probably a lot of people that wouldn't know.
As opposed to cellular senescence, which is when apoptosis fails in your later age because your cells cannot divide anymore.
So,
and that's where a lot of
your
age-related
point, though,
diseases come from.
They discovered that hundreds of years ago on viruses. I'm sorry, that's a completely different thing. You can't come in and tell me that the injection of nucleotides into my cell, specifically nucleotides in my cell, that is not intended to kill it, is not going to sit there and increase my risk.
Riddle me this, if you will. If a cell gets a virus that comes into it and does whatever, and say it's not a gamete cell, because a viral inclusion that persists generationally must occur in a gamete cell.
Yep.
Right? So suppose that one of those events happens in a non-gamete cell, which is more likely to happen because there's simply way more of them. Other finicky details about receptors notwithstanding. ACE2 is a good example. Your lungs are much larger than your balls. So suppose you get a viral inclusion like that. What is to stop your concerns about cancer from happening then? Would it not be a reasonable suspicion?
I still have concerns.
Would it not be a reasonable? I know. I'm just look. I'm framing it to the point where you can make the point you want. All right.
No. You've already framed it enough. I got this.
No,
right?
I haven't. There is something that is required to get there yet. All right. This is like cosmic rays and black holes and ending the Earth. All right. I just got to get to the point where there's a reasonable estimation of the risk. So, in the same way here, that people who are arguing that black holes would be formed in the LHC had to contend with the fact that they'd be happening all the time in our upper atmosphere anyway. The concern here is that you might have some sort of inclusion, mRNA or otherwise. And by the way, the mRNA doesn't get reversed back into cRNA or DNA very easily. It is a miracle that happens if it ever does.
There's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between rarely and never.
Right.
Huge difference.
Which is how the viral inclusions happen.
The problem, so viruses can absolutely give you cancer. That's a real thing. The entire reason that we have the HPV
Right,
vaccine
dogs get this all
is
the time.
because
Yes.
viruses get cancer.
Cervical
right?
cervical cancer. Right, cervical cancer. Dogs get face cancer from viruses.
Absolutely.
The point here, but we're talking about coronaviruses, so we can at least couch it in there. And again, this is to your points, which I know you want to make, and I'm sorry I'm blue ballsing you on this, but give me a minute.
Oh
The point here being that with all of the common colds that happen ever, that include members of coronavirus, is it not plausible that you'd have sufficient inclusions that would yield spike inclusions, that you would at least have seen some sort of linkage towards an expressed disease state that actually shows or demonstrates your concern? And the answer is there might be, but we don't have any characterization of it.
We have so the problem that you have here is sitting there and taking a very broad thing of, hey, there's some viruses, they might have infected you, and we could possibly do that. Yeah, we don't have a way to control that, right?
Well, I'm narrowing it down to the point where you can make the comparison you want to make, which is that mRNA inclusions are reversing back towards you get a DNA inclusion. Sure, it's plausible. Sure, there could be some sort of cancer risk due to damage to the cell. Point being that the kind of inclusions that do happen, which are evident in our DNA from viruses in the past that managed to infect and not kill gamete cells, which had the same capacity to get into much larger organs and therefore definitely must have. Like, just point here that the relative risk is an unassessed thing, which is your primary point, that we don't know what the risk is. And that's
don't know what the risk
fine.
is.
That is a valid statement. I'm just
there's
pointing out that
in
terms of relative risk, there is a much larger category that poses a similar kind of problem. That we would expect to see some kind of behavior similar to what you're expecting.
That's built into my risk assessment. A virus is much less likely to leave the cell intact than the mRNA vaccines, because the mRNA vaccines are intended to leave the cell intact, and the other one is intended not.
Well, let's rephrase that for a second, though. They're not directly intended to kill the cell. That's different than intending to leave them intact.
Whatever.
Well, they are certainly messy. We could say that with certainty.
Right. So that doesn't affect the argument. You're absolutely right. I have a risk in taking on an actual full-blown infection from coronavirus, which, again, I believe I already have.
Any coronavirus, mind you. Any of them. Any of them, including the ones that are in the common cold.
Talking about... but the point is that the actual risk from an individual infection of a specific disease is significantly less because the cells undergo, because the cells lyse, because they spew out virus, because the purpose of the virus entering the cell is to replicate the virus to the point of cell death. The number of times where something is going to have a successful inclusion is much, much lower with an actual infectious disease, potentially.
It's a numbers game. It's absolutely a numbers game here, and I would say that if you look at the viral inclusions in the human genome, while there's many of them, humans have existed for around 200,000 years, and most of those viral inclusions happened before we evolved as a species.
Right. When we turn around and we start talking about accumulate those inclusions. What we have is 4.5 billion years of essentially, that's 4.5.
Let's go ahead and narrow that down to a more reasonable expectation for what we could at least recognize as discriminative, like where we could discriminate viral versus non-viral. We've got about 2 billion years, maybe, where we could make that assessment, which is 2 billion years.
I thought that's like 1.5 billion. If you're talking about when you went from ribozymes to cell structures, I thought that was like 1.5 billion.
We're talking about extra zeros on a number here, which is the important thing. On the scale of a billion years, a human is this little pipsqueak at the end of it, a couple zeros.
Right.
The rest of that
At the end of the
all the
day,
time you need.
there are two inherent things that I see as risks associated with the vaccines. Well, actually, three things. There do seem to be, although I did read a study that has
Four.
made me. No, it's actually three things.
I'm fucking with you. I do.
It is adverse events from the vaccine, but I want to actually talk about this a little bit because I read it to just point out that I do not sit there and stake my positions and hold them indefinitely. I read a study this past week that was being touted by a whole bunch of folks as an alarming study, but what they essentially found was that part of the reason for adverse events may be because of direct injection of the mRNA into venal structures, which leads them to have a direct access to the heart where they're not supposed to be. And that there might actually be strategy. That would be stupid. But apparently, when you sit there and you vaccinate 160 million people with something that injects, via injection, even if it's supposed to be an IM or intramuscular injection, some proportion of the intramuscular material is going to end up in a vein solely because you have a bunch of nurses doing this.
Well, I was going to say here.
Times per day.
Well, remember, actually, I mean,
you don't just have nurses injecting things. You've got, apparently, in some places, you got pharmacists.
Well, wasn't it Fauci? Or it was somebody, like some medical person that was talking about giving. That said, I would get to choose where to give it if Donald Trump asked to get the vaccine, and I'd give it to him in a really uncomfortable place with a lot of blood vessels, I believe was said, specifically. Or is that just me remembering things inconveniently?
The point that I was trying to get to is in terms of changing my opinion, the study has actually made me less concerned about adverse events, at least in the long term, with this stuff. I still think that that's a major problem, and it seems that the reason that we have the high level of adverse events is probably because we're doing a mass vaccination campaign and people are tired and they're not fucking functioning properly, and they're injecting something that should be by no means injected into a vein by accident, right?
Sure.
And it's just inadvertent administration of this thing, which means that the vaccines are probably a lot safer, potentially, in the short term than what a lot of people are giving them credit, and it's just people fucking up the injection.
Well, here's another thing that's important.
Interesting study.
And here's another thing that's important.
That's if you get that, by the way, link it. I'd like to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we discussed this. I don't remember if Steve was in when we went through the interferon release as an issue, but we did in a previous episode we did discuss the idea that the myocarditis and pericarditis is some new and enhanced risk due to the vaccine. And it's just flat out, in a relative sense here, it's important, relative sense, it's flat out not an increased risk. Entirely due to the fact that any kind of stimulated interferon release is going to cause damage to the heart. And that happens with any cold respiratory disease. You're going to have
your
interferon
argument,
release.
You raised this to me, and the problem that you have is that we are seeing very high rates of myocarditis.
No higher than typical for the flu. Less than that.
Okay.
10% of people who get the flu, this is reported flu, and this is the people who actually show up and say, "Hey, doctor, I need you to check me out. I feel bad."
1 in 1,000.
It's 10%. 10% of cases of the flu that present in clinic that are confirmed as the flu.
I'm talking about. Hold on. I'm talking about myocarditis as a result of the vaccine. It's about 1 in 1,000. That was the most recent.
Low.
Data.
And look, it's stimulated interferon release sucks.
Like my risk is 1 in 30,000.
The risk of myocarditis from the coronavirus, same age group, young people, right? Same age group. It's like was it 4 to 6 times higher than the vaccine?
I'd have to see the data on that. I would have to.
Evan, you linked it under the episode, I believe, because I know I posted in the chat.
Let me see.
It'd be back a ways in the staff chat. There are two. There was the reason why that was brought up is because there was a paper going around that did an apples to oranges comparison to hospitalization rate in COVID patients, unvaccinated COVID patients. Or I think maybe it was just COVID patients in general. Anyway, it did the rate of myocarditis in these young people versus from the vaccine versus the hospitalization due to the virus, as if that was some kind of reasonable comparison, and it's just not. That's apples and oranges,
I mean,
and the authors knew it.
The probability of me ending up in a hospital is 1 in 7,000, which is, again, well within acceptable life risks. The probability of dying is 1 in 30,000.
The vast majority of the time, myocarditis is not a hospital issue. The vast majority of the time.
Okay.
It's just the way it is. If you get mild chest discomfort from a bad cold and it's over your heart, that's probably myocarditis. Okay.
Either way,
tightness in your chest.
The point doesn't really matter. There are adverse events, right?
Yes,
what causes those adverse events? And those adverse events seem to have a very high degree of severity in comparison to most other vaccines that we take. Much higher than most other vaccines.
So here's the thing. I would say this. It's not required for most countries anymore, but at one time on the yellow card, the ICVP, the reason it's called the yellow card, the reason it is printed in yellow, the yellow fever vaccine was a requirement to get into many countries for a while. Mm-hmm. The yellow fever vaccine is not given automatically like, say, the polio vaccine or Tdap or MMR, because it sucks so much to get the yellow fever vaccine. Now imagine if yellow fever was suddenly everywhere, and we were going, how the hell do we get rid of this? We have the vaccine, but it sucks. It is less severe than the actual infection from the virus. And that is the metric we use to determine whether or not we should use the vaccine. I agree with the relative risk issue. I think that should be a choice thing. But it's at the same time, you gotta judge.
That's people. If they came out with yellow fever, because we've had yellow fever vaccine for 30 years now? Something like that.
No, but we didn't have it when it was first introduced.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have taken it.
I mean, no, seriously. This is an important part of the conversation, and this is a reasonable, retrospective discussion. That's the position.
And by the way, that's not to say that I'm inherently opposed to every single new medication that ever comes out, right? There is a
you just mentioned vaccine. It's been around for 30 years, and you'd take it today. And it's been proven relatively safe relative to the disease. If you're going to go to some place that had yellow fever, I suspect you would probably take it.
And there's other problems here associated with COVID, because COVID is basically a non-serious disease, right? Where we're talking about something that you get it, and it's within the realm of acceptable life risks. I literally have a manual from the government that says this is acceptable in terms of relative life risks and what everybody wants to expose you to, and the CDC
but
data
if it's
says
good enough for government work. I'm gonna fuck with you on that one.
You can say that, but
Captain 3 sig figs over here. I've got a manual.
I really do. It's really funny. So we had a you want to talk about like people who got fucking stones, right? So we had a meeting with the site manager. And the site manager is sitting there and going through and having to listen to every employee's concern. So I had three questions, which was, is the company going? Yeah, it does. It really was kind of painful. So my three questions were very simple. Is the company planning on accepting liability for any consequences associated with the vaccine, known risks and unknown risks? I want to make sure that if I do get cancer or some sort of infertility shit comes up, they're going to be right on the line to sit there and foot the bill for all those costs. I think that's an important part of the discussion. They said they didn't know. Other questions that I had is, can we use right to try for another vaccine? And I can't remember what the third one was, but I waited until the very end of the conversation, after everybody had, after you get like the people who had real questions, you got into the people who want to like plead some sort of emotional case, and it's just like, to go on like 10-minute rants.
Are afraid of vaccines.
Yeah,
They've had every other
those
vaccine.
Those people. So
Fair,
I've
yeah.
given them all the mineral oil and miracle mineral water in the world.
The site manager and all of the executives are about to sign off. It's the end of the hour. I say, do you mind if I offer one more point, one more question for you?
Oh boy.
And they turn around and they say, yeah. As a moment of levity, I'm looking at my manual here issued by the federal government, which states that on this page in this manual it says that my relative life risk is approximately X. Are we planning on updating the manual for radiation life risks in response to COVID as to what the government now finds to be an acceptable risk for employees to take because COVID risk is less than radiation risk?
Ooh. Ooh.
Here's the
Oh, that's
thing, like,
spicy.
This is important because the OSHA rules, an emergency OSHA rule, has to rely on data as a basis for it, or it's supposed to
It has to
have to
rely
rely on data.
This is actually one of the things that I'm hoping once they drop it, it gets sued over because the OSHA rule they're relying on is something that gives them the power and the authority to develop something in response to a grave concern. So any other government document that exists at all in any way, shape, or form that says that the risk level here is not a grave concern, OSHA is not allowed to sit there and write that rule.
Keep in mind, these are legally defined terms, for the listeners.
These are legally defined terms.
Yeah, this is going to get spicy.
There is a number associated with it, yeah.
If there is a relative risk from COVID that is acceptable, less than what the government has determined to be an acceptable life risk for me, then automatically that OSHA rule should get thrown out in court. And they should be able to point to anything that in OSHA that actually highlights those risks, and they should be able to point to any other manual. And the radiation safety stuff, because those of us who deal with it, this is basically what we're told, is it's always a low life risk. And in the case of COVID is a lower life risk than my radiation exposure, which is like nothing.
Interesting.
The science fair experiments that come out of your wife's loins at a later date may or may not have something to say about the radiation risk.
Oh, the risk to the unborn child is small too. I just went through my qual. My qual has informed me of the right thing to say to idiots like you who want to question the power of nuclear power. But going back to my three things. So in terms of this, I changed my opinion on the actual adverse events. I know they exist. But I would actually say that on a short-term basis, the vaccine is probably safe. I'm not particularly worried about adverse events coming and affecting me. I am still concerned about long-term events, and I am not concerned about COVID. The second issue that I have...
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, people, like, we've previously got, and we periodically come back to this too, but, like, we've previously mentioned, a lot of this sounds like two angry people yelling at each other. We oftentimes end up arguing about the frayed end of the rope rather than the whole of it. We have a common set of facts that we have to agree to, and the basis for these, and me bringing up the idea of viral inclusions, etc. The point there wasn't it wasn't an aha or a gotcha. It was to establish a framework within which we can agree, these are the facts of reality as we know them.
Well, I mean,
we largely agree on the stuff we talk about here.
Well, I don't know.
We largely agree on the fact basis we have to agree on.
That's true. That's true.
And we don't generally speaking here, unless we're being an asshole and fucking around with each other, we don't genuinely push forward nonsense and pretend it's a fact here.
Well, I don't think
that's not a way of having an argument.
Nope.
But
nope.
But coming back to the common fact basis, in addition to basically teasing apart the different ways to view the facts and to look at different safety stances on them as it concerns vaccines and the virus. There's also the point where you have to update those to be consistent with what we've observed so far. And this is a good example of this in action here. You don't need a published paper to state that there's the update that's happened from another publication or observation has occurred.
Well,
So the thing that you might
at the
see
end of
is
the day,
there's going to be a lot of ideological pushback to any new data that comes out like this, which is unfortunate.
with any new data on which part?
Well, on efficacy, on safety, etc.
Oh yeah.
People build these things into their political cachet. They become sacred cows.
To say the
You
least.
want to talk about the most? You want to? So I think I linked. So I linked that paper. If you go through the abstract of that paper that is on the injection of the drug and adverse events, and it talks about how it could. The first thing it says is the vaccines are safe and effective. The paper is not fucking evaluating the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. It shouldn't have that byline in it. It almost made me fucking throw up because you see this again. The only thing that's safe and effective is masturbation because it gets you there 100% of the time, and you really have to fuck it up in order to die. Right? Everything else is less safe.
There's a
and
lot
less
of people that don't
effective
get there
than
100% of the time, and they are unfortunate.
Well, listen, we're not talking about outliers like David Carradine here.
Okay, I gotta be nice.
Okay, there it is. Okay, I was looking. So it wasn't in the abstract. It was after the gray box.
Paragraph?
It's the first paragraph.
Yeah.
Here.
Got
there
it.
it is. Yeah, safe and effective
either
whole
way,
population
it's
vaccination.
Like the,
Oh, hold on.
fucking
I gotta push back on that. Sorry, and it's minor. I'm not gonna harp on it, but just because it's important as a detail thing. It mentions safe and effective. Sorry, I'll just read it. Safe and effective whole population vaccination against SARS-2 is the only long-term solution to ongoing COVID-19 pandemic.
Jesus.
Now, that is an assertion. No, it does reference it.
Yep.
I'm guessing the reference doesn't fucking matter for a statement like that.
I don't think so. This
Lessons,
is one of the
okay,
problems
that's a
you have with
retrospective.
modern papers.
So that's
The
an
problems
assertion.
that you have with these. The problem that you have with these modern papers is a lot of times they're doing citation trails, and it's not their own fucking work. And I don't even understand why it's in the paper. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's cited because I'm guessing it comes to some sort of conclusion that that's the case.
It
is, however, a rhetorical assertion, and so this is one of those. So while there are things that you can say and cite in papers that are outright wrong, there are things that you can say that need to be cited, but they're just right. That would be the reason why you have to cite them. But then there's things that fall into the gray area where it's as a rhetorical device built in, and it is an assertion. I would guarantee, like, this is, they say the only long-term solution only is bullshit. A long-term solution.
In any case, it was an intriguing paper, but it's still one of those things where we get into this, like, there is a fucking line, and everybody's using the line, and that, I have no fucking confidence when people sit there and tell me a fucking line.
It reads as Talmudic to me. So, us Jews and our fucking arguments. The way that they start off in the Talmud effectively is, well, we all agree such and such, which is, consistent with the letter of the Torah.
Well, hey, 9 out of 10 doctors smoke Camels. I mean,
well, it's kind of like that, but all 10 of the doctors are in the same room. So
they enjoy the toasted tobacco flavor, of course.
What they do is they say, well, we all agree that that you should pray such and such times a day, and such places and so on. But like, does the yarmulke have to be at this angle on the top of your head or this angle? It's a rhetorical phrasing to box in conversation so you can narrow down further, and it's not even like, I wouldn't even go so far as to say it's frowned upon necessarily, because you do the same shit to get a proposal in, let alone as the intro to a paper. Like, say I did a paper on, like, good.
I suspect those words are part of the grant proposal, and that's to try to get the money for the fucking grant.
Well, like, everything, like, half the shit I ended up doing in lab when I was working on TLCPs, that's, like, half of that, like, we ended up starting off with, well, global warming is a threat, blah, 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 anywhere hydrogen fuel. Anyway, we want to burn plastic, stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, well, and I mean that's unfortunate. It's in papers. It's one of the reasons why we gotta fucking rip the scientific foundations out by their roots and get back to people actually just making a fucking point. But the paper's
Yeah.
pretty good. Other than that, and you do
yeah.
see that kind of stuff. So that stuff. Going back to my three things that concern me about the vaccine, right?
Right.
The first was short-term effects. Short-term effects appear to be caused by incompetence in the person administering the vaccine, right?
Okay. And
That's
now,
what this paper essentially says.
Okay.
now
Fair.
here's
Interesting.
and I will go through the paper later, but just as a blanket statement early on here, that would I would posit that the sensational nature of the adverse event of the day that people pick out of theirs uh, to make graphics about it and then immediately turn it into a Trump Biden argument. I would suspect that there's a correlation causation issue here that needs to be asserted that is blurred by the wider prevalence of generic adverse events. That you'd have to segregate what subpopulation of those events is truly due to, the Barbados nurse, who went there for her nursing school because, fuck going to a U.S. college that actually has requirements. Yeah, I would posit that those kind of injections
this paper
are
is
not
not on that.
right.
So this is not evaluating what is causing adverse events in humans. This is
Right.
What caused adverse events in mice, right?
So this is
It
the
is
extension to that
suggestive.
I'm throwing out immediately is that you'd have to find a
Right.
way to population separate in your data. And maybe there's a series of shitty nurses out there. Maybe it's just people have fucked up muscles in their arms and half of them got unlucky.
The point is that this has been alleviated for me.
Sure.
When I say incompetence, it could be a variety of different causes, but it would seem to be that it is not the. My guess is this goes back to like, why did this not show up in the phase 1 trials? And the answer is because in phase 1 trials they're doing everything by the fucking book.
Well,
And
frankly,
Gen
what they
Pop,
probably should have done is injected everyone right in the ass, where the biggest muscle is and the least amount of that venous architecture is.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Or God forbid, like the calf, where your body has to fight to bring the blood back up. Something.
Yep. Any one of those would have been a better choice for the shot. But that was one thing that I have. I'm letting go of the severe adverse events. I don't know of too many people personally who have had severe adverse events. I know secondhand of people who have had severe adverse events. And it appears that there is a cause for the severe adverse events, which is directly related to vascular tissue and vascularization of the actual vaccine, which it's not supposed to do. So it goes back to one of the things we talked about.
I'll put this out there briefly. Second hand for you. Third hand for you, I guess. Second hand for me. Person I know did have an adverse reaction. And now we're not sure exactly what was going on, but it appears that it might, and it's runs in their family. It might have just been latent autoimmune issue that was pissed off briefly, but for weeks had intermittent fever and generally felt like crap. But not like massive interferon release. I got the flu crap, but like run down and awful because fever, and then the fever goes away, and then it comes back for hours or days and then goes away. That is all subsided by now. It was basically a prolonged immune reaction, but easily could have been autoimmune feedback loop that got triggered out of nowhere. So these things do happen.
They do. I'm not doubting that they don't happen. Right?
But the point is that is distinctly not related to a venous injection.
Sure. Okay. The point that I'm trying to make is I originally had 3 things that were holding me back from getting the vaccine, and all 3 of them have to be answered before I go do it. Actually, it's
right.
I guess you're right. There is technically 4 things, but
I win.
The 4th. that goes talking about like drilling into the details.
Right,
Like 3 and 4 are the same kind of thing. It's all long-term
Right.
effects. It's just which specific long-term effects did I turn around and say, okay, I want to see data on X and Y and Z. And I found X on, data on Z, but X and Y, they're like, yeah, we haven't concluded any studies. But hey, no, that's not how that fucking works, you assholes. You either say, I don't know, or, we do know.
It's the thing,
said, I don't know, but they'll be fine.
Scientists use, like, it's funny, James Randi's right. Scientists learn early on that saying I don't know is an okay thing until they get a goddamn PhD. And then the words leave the vocabulary. The phrase is gone, deleted from memory, the moment your hand touches the diploma.
I can kind of believe that.
I'm gonna have to play that up to fuck with people in the not too distant future, because that's gonna be hilarious. The phrase is I don't know and I was wrong.
Yep.
Oh no, you're mistaken.
So the second one that I have an issue with is ADE, and that is something that we won't know anything about for another couple years. Realistically speaking,
I would say this: China found out within a couple of months, back in 2003, about ADE. It did not take very long after they got a couple 100,000 people in for several thousand to die.
But
from the vaccine.
in this case, the problem that we have here is that we have scared the shit out of people. So we are vaccinating people, and we have all of these other social control measures, some of which are going to be more effective, some of which are going to be less effective. Masks less effective, lockdowns less effective. But a lot of people are still social distancing.
Some even counterproductive, for that matter.
So we probably have some people who are not getting as exposed as readily as they want. And while I understand that, I have also heard other stories that you see some preliminary data out of the UK that's showing it's not so great for folks who are vaccinated. And it's gonna take a year or two to play out, right? That's a moderate to mid to long midterm concern, right? It's not a that's not going to show up.
This is, of course, too, providing that the data is made available, which it should be, but there is that chance that they will obfuscate.
It depends on the mechanism at play, because ADE is, it's like saying cancer, except not as extreme, but it's not 200 varieties of ADE, but there's a couple different varieties.
There are indeed.
Most of them are acute. Some could plausibly take longer. I think that 2 to 3 years is a long period of time, but it should certainly capture the problem.
It's certainly outside of the 60 days. And the biggest problem that we have with the vaccines is when we start talking about the FDA and their data acceptance, they stopped collecting the data for the Pfizer vaccine, at least, on March 13th. And most of the others weren't rolled out until a little bit after Pfizer. So we have basically only 60 days of real data that we've evaluated professionally, right? And that's an issue. This goes back to irresponsibilities by the government in actually issuing this stuff. They should have been collecting all the data. They should have had weekly trackers. They should have had all of this stuff. And they shouldn't have written this stupid fucking bullshit about here's your multiplier of a base rate, which you don't know, the kind of stuff that we've pointed out the whole time. So ADE is a midterm effect. In terms of where it's going to show up, it's also going to depend on the variants and a bunch of other stuff. So that's 2 to 3 years is, I think, a reasonable period of time to make an assessment on that concern. That is not something that's going to be alleviated in 6 months. It's not something that's going to be alleviated in 18 months. And it sure as shit is not going to be something that's going to be alleviated when people aren't releasing data.
Now, here's something I'll put out there. Right now. Here's something I'll put out there. Unless it falls into the gray area of just crazy bad enough for people to start noticing, but not so much that it, that the government still can't quite keep a lid on it. You'll probably notice if ADE is going to be a big problem, it should pop up by end of year. There should be some people getting it. Because we have people that were vaccinated almost a year ago now.
You do. But
well, actually, you've got the test cases that actually were indeed the phase 1 trials.
But to your point, there are some longer-acting ADE issues, which is fine.
There's longer-acting ADE issues, but more importantly,
These
the
would be
vaccine
involving
supply
variants.
had supply chain issues that didn't really show up until March, or like we didn't have the massive, abundant supply for everybody until March or April.
Right.
Like I had access to it, I think in February, because I'm military contractor.
Right.
But that won't probably. I do not expect that to have any sort of results that are peer-reviewed, published, at a minimum.
Right.
By next summer. That would be the earliest that I would expect to see anything definitive on whether ADE is happening or not.
That's a reasonable estimate.
And even then, that's only going to be preliminary. That's not going to be like.
But again, if
2
there's
to 3
even
years
that question,
is when we start talking about the full cycle.
If there's even if ADE is going to one of the mechanisms by which ADE would be a problem is if a variant occurred that was immunity resistant, prior immunity resistant,
which we have two,
bypasses
but
it
they
completely.
aren't widespread in the U.S.
Which means bypasses it completely, doesn't give a flying fuck about the original. So if one of those shows up and the antibodies for the original, and this would affect anybody who had the if it's the spike protein antibodies, it would affect anybody who had prior immunity. So if you had the virus, if you had the vaccine, one of the ways that ADE can happen there is if
in circulation that fit that profile.
Right.
The lambda and the milk. Both of them fit that profile, and we won't see them until they start to circulate in the U.S. Because right now it's all third world countries. That shit's not going to report shit that's reliable.
Yeah. So basically, the point here is that if that's a longer acting ADE issue, even if the mechanism by which ADE is one of the several more acute varieties, it has to wait for a variant fitting that kind of profile to spring up and cause a problem. So
that's why I'm saying 2 to 3 years before I'm content with this isn't going to create an ADE issue, right?
Okay.
And I think that's reasonable. In 3 years, lambda and a variant that is immune evading for the spike protein will have circulated amongst everybody in the next 2 to 3 years.
Keep in mind. So I want to be clear on the nomenclature, and it's fine for the ambiguity for what we just discussed, but just to be clear on the nomenclature, immune evading is the gray area. Sterilizing immunity is the pristine, the white area, if you will, the clear skies area. They have the gray area, which is immune evading, where the vaccines are still somewhat effective, but they're leaky. And it allows
right now, which is what we have.
Yeah, that's basically everything at the moment.
We have.
Delta, Lambda, Mu, all immune evading. Immune resistant, or
Delta,
what they would just call
Delta
vaccine resistant. Again.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, that explains why we're seeing the numbers out of the UK and Israel. So
it's why it's been getting worse and worse as it evolves more and more strains in the Delta region of the block of genetic shit. The plot I'm talking about. Anyway,
and this is one of the other issues that I have morally with pushing out leaky vaccines. By the way, this is why I support Codagenics and their vaccine, and why I don't support Pfizer, Moderna, or the Johnson & Johnson. Targeting solely the spike protein to try to short cycle things created a leaky vaccine, which is literally promoting variants.
True.
So,
well, it could be argued it's true. I can't say it is actually true, but there's a very strong argument.
Promoting is not a
it is
not ascribe morality.
Does not variants.
Does not ascribe immorality. Promoting is the right word, but not in the ascribed morality context. Not like a salesman.
It is. Yes, because this path and avenue for replication is closed off. The viruses that come out that are all slightly different from each other because nothing, and biology is not a uniform process. That's why we have mutants. We call them intersex. Because biology is not a uniform process, because we don't have perfect replication, the stuff that is selected for in somebody who has a Pfizer or Moderna vaccine is overwhelmingly going to be stuff that has less amount of the original Syncta1 spike protein that was pushed out, because you're essentially immune to anything that has that, and so the only thing that replicates is the stuff that has less of that, and there's less probability for the immune system to actually engage it.
This now brings us to the other end of the curve here. So we had sterilizing immunity, immune evading, and then you have immune or vaccine resistant, depending on how you want to describe the so prior immunity or vaccine resistant.
I would argue
those
in this case,
resistance
resistance
resistance is like antibiotic resistance. It means doesn't give a flying fuck. It's like spraying DEET on a Florida mosquito. It laughs and snorts more. So, the immune evading stuff is the gray area. We've got 3 that fit the profile for that: immune resistant or prior immunity resistant and vaccine resistant. That's going to be the stuff at the other end. And we just right now, when one of those shows up, it's going to be like a bomb going off, because all of the politicians that were previously saying all the bullshit from last year are going to go back and review their notes to turn back to you, the cynical citizen, waiting to hear their next rimshot joke. We're all going to stay home 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I've got a moment of zen for you guys to close us off here, if you'd like. From an argument I had just 2 hours ago, it appears.
Go ahead.
I quoted the tweet that had Don Lemon saying whatever stupid shit to Sanjay Gupta. And it said Don Lemon needs to look up off-label prescription medications and learn when to shut the fuck up after being caught in an obvious, direct, and publicly published lie. And the only defense CNN will have left is the truth. No sane, rational person watches CNN to be informed of presented facts. So someone decided to reply to me with just the FDA .gov link on why you should not use ivermectin to treat or prevent COVID-19. And if you go to that page and you scroll down just a little bit, it doesn't take far. You get to the point where there's a couple of bullets there. It says what you need to know about ivermectin. And the 1, 2, 3, 4th one is, if your healthcare provider writes you an ivermectin prescription, fill it through a legitimate source such as the pharmacy and take it exactly as prescribed.
Huh.
So I went ahead and I quoted that back to him in a tweet, and I said, the FDA agrees with Joe Rogan, try again. And they said, I mean, their brilliant responses, or do the smart thing and get a second opinion. So I reply with, so now you don't want to cite the FDA? What happened? Did the FDA put on a MAGA hat and you finally read the website you linked to? Said, if I have parasitic worms or head lice, it's one thing. If my doctor prescribed it for a virus, I'm afraid I'm going to have to get a second opinion on that. It said, well, your 5th or 6th doctor finally agrees with you to get you out of the clinic. Do feel better about your abdication of medical opinion for political ideology. So, there you go. The people who are out there screaming at you about shit like ivermectin, which I believe if your doctor is going to prescribe you an effective medication, whatever it is, and you choose to take it, you should not be shat on for that, because
that's true.
Presumably the doctor is trying to save your life. And if you don't have a vaccine, or if you're not vaccinated or you're vaccinated, if you have no prior immunity or you got infected before, and you manage to get infected, period, and the doctor prescribes you medicine to help you when you've already got the fucking virus in you, just take, that's the thing. I don't understand how they rationalize in their head how that's some kind of an own on somebody that they took the medicine the doctor told them to take. So there's your moment of zen. Even the idiots trying to cite the FDA to tell you otherwise for an effective medicine don't want to hear it when the FDA says they're fucking wrong.
Well, they don't want to hear it when anybody says they're wrong. But that's...
Their own sources are saying that they're wrong. Their own source says they're wrong.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, it's like using the CDC data on gun violence. I mean, yeah, you can, but then we can actually dig into the numbers and say, well, sure, that one thing you said was true, but then we have to consider the minimum of 2 million defensive gun uses per year by American citizens, which vastly, by orders of magnitude, outnumber violent crime. But, that's just if we go into the CDC statistics.
Who needs those?
Right. Well, I do actually have a little bit of a bit of a vindication even for our master Steve here from one of our least
Just
favorite
know that
Frenchmen.
Steve is never wrong and always gets vindicated.
Well, then you're gonna.
Everybody gets to learn that lesson.
Well, you're
Macron!
absolutely gonna
Yes!
dig this. So Macron has basically been saying something that we've just kind of off and on talked about. Small nuclear reactors will be part of his
my
France
God.
2030 plan. And that's brilliant. That's how it should be everywhere.
That's good.
It should be France 2025 plan, but 2030 will get there fast enough, I guess.
I would really love to see. I would really love to see people get to the point where we have household nuclear reactors.
Yeah.
Well, or at the very
It's
least,
not
you know,
particularly
neighborhoods.
hard.
Well, people thought that gasoline exploding in engines was going to be a horror fest. And we're all drive those little exploding engines around. There's a little exploding engine outside the house here as a generator. People cart them around.
Well,
they drive around with them between their fucking legs.
I would be all for like farmers, instead of wiping out huge swaths of land for solar panels for their operations, have a little nuclear reactor and then we disconnect them from the grid, right? Like that.
Or
kind
connect
of thing
them to the grid to further enhance it. For that matter.
I mean, the reason I say
whatever,
take the farmers off the grid is not because I don't want them on the grid. It's because the maintenance and costs associated with maintaining electricity to extremely rural regions is a poor use of copper.
Okay,
and,
yeah, no, that's
B,
a fair point.
Is imposing a cost that is not necessary. And moving
I also
to
think
small
that
modular reactors.
we should be doing ground-bearing superconducting cables, but I mean, who needs to worry about electrical grid losses?
I would be all for that. So I thought about that for a long time. I think
places,
the cost
do the long
associated
runs,
with ground cables is crazy expensive. That's I think the problem.
California just got through round 2 of fixing a failure like that. They had the high pressure oil cable, like the 6 of them that go from one side of LA to the other. They just got through a second event where they had to freeze out the oil on either side to keep the tension up, and as a pressure plug.
Yep.
Oh,
they
great.
were pouring liquid nitrogen onto that pipe the whole fucking time. Like, that was an oil explosion waiting to happen, and the only reason it didn't is because they froze like 10 meters of oil on either side of that pipe opening.
Oh, man.
Yep.
Which is
is
a huge amount of stuff to keep cold, by the way.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
The pipe's like what, 5-6 feet in diameter. That's a lot of oil.
Although we actually we don't use them very often where I am, but it is actually a pretty cool thing. Freeze seals are very, very common as a means of, especially on something like a nuclear reactor, where it takes it takes days to get them shut down. Well, it takes days with modern safety regulations. Back in the day, we could swap entire cores in and out and interchange the fuels for our experiments and get it done in a day. But now it takes typically a few days, several hours to online a reactor. I think it's like 3 days before they feel they are comfortable with criticality. But given that there's that much time, if they have a leak on a primary coolant system, obviously you can't let it go until its next major phase cycle. Yeah. So what they'll do is there's usually redundancies. Most of the systems in a nuclear reactor have at least 2 redundancies, or at least 1 additional redundancy, so they can freeze seal the component that's broken on both ends of the pipe, cut it out, and then replace it. And it can be a live operation, and it's pretty amazing. Yeah. Pretty cool that they can do that.
Yeah.
So similar things will happen if you're dealing with like an oil line, or if you're dealing with a steam line. When you have a regulated line. If you do regulated lines with redundancy, then you usually have valve lock-off, and you can. So for every major valve or every major regulator that you have, you'll have a pair of valves on either side of it, and you can close off both, and then pull the device out, put the replacement back in, open up both sets on both sides, and then it goes back into service. And those are usually also coupled with a manual valve bypass to complete it. So, I mean, with nuclear, you've got a whole other level of crazy shit you got to deal with for that kind of thing. Then you got regulation on top of that.
Yeah, books worth,
Yep.
I'm sure.
Well, yeah, but he has the books.
Well, no, I
And
mean
I
specific
absolutely-
books just for one regulation.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest problem that you have with so if you want to talk about the biggest failures of U.S. nuclear, one is that everybody freaked out about it after Chernobyl. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say that it's not
a reactor
implemented
that is-
everywhere.
What?
Nuclear
US
power.
safety?
No, U.S. nuclear power, it should be
I
everywhere.
mean, well,
That's the biggest
reasons-
mistake with it,
There's some
but-
reasons for it. The biggest issue is that we were building them, and it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to Mark Schneider, he's of the opinion that we stopped building these reactors because there was a surplus of power in the 80s, and that may or may not be true.
No, I don't think so.
There's some truth to it because we
Some,
started
but-
unlining shitloads of nuclear reactors. My
Yeah.
view is that fossil fuel companies and environmentalists work together to shut it down.
Ironic.
Well, I would say
That-
like
that's
no, they work together in the same way that banks work together with Occupy. They bought them. That's what happened.
yes. That
Well,
is correct.
worked together. I mean, now banks and Occupy actually do literally work together directly. I mean, they're on the phone.
That's
and
what
stuff.
I mean.
Yes.
Is they
Yes.
like the oil companies purchased the through shell companies, mind you, with their investments. They basically funded the environmental groups,
That's
got
correct.
them to make their publications, and then pushed out the leadership who got all jaded and pissed off about it, but didn't have anything to say in public anymore.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's funny. All the
That-
real
that is-
environmentalists
that is
used to be on the right. Anyway.
Well, I mean, I think for the most part they are right.
Oh,
And
the real
problem
ones
is
anymore, but I mean, like
environmentalism.
back in the day, the actual organizations were right-wing organizations, but that's some long time gone.
Some of them, a lot of them
They-
were also
they
hippies.
still are.
Yes.
They still are for the most part, right? Like the majority of people who actually take environmental action seriously are folks like myself, who we do things.
Well, a perfect
like,
example is
you know,
Scott Preslow.
I have.
Oh, you mean
Scott
cleaning
Presslow's a
up
good
liberal
example.
areas? That's
Yeah.
pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah,
you've got
but
this
he-
right-wing dude that's like, no, I'm just going to help. That's all. No, I'm just going to help. You don't even have to
But
believe in
the
my
rest
thing.
the rest of us will buy a large chunk of land. We'll occupy it with our house, which is going to occupy however many square feet that is. And then we'll have a lawn and stuff like that. But then we'll also maintain woodlands, right? In my case, my front lawn is a traditional lawn because I want to be able to sell my house in the future, right? But my wife has worked extremely hard at building out a full garden and full patio segment, which
Right.
is not grasslands, because grassland is basically a wasteland ecologically. And at any given time, we're moving into winter,
Right.
but we have hordes of snakes, we have hordes of chipmunks and squirrels
Mhm.
and bunnies and all this other stuff that lives. Like we have right next to the primary entrance to my house, we have it can't be more than a 10 by 3 foot area, 30 square
Yeah.
feet, right? And there are at least 4 small mammals that live in that and share that space. And I
So
think we got a
we've got
groundhog
about-
under the other thing.
Yeah. So
You got armored
I
rat.
live on about 12 acres, and like the back half or 2/3 of it is basically just woods.
Yep.
It's
And we have
occasionally have to go in there and pull a tree down or move something, but like a lot of
Yep.
the yard waste from out in the front half goes right back there. I grow plenty of my own herbs and such, herbs and spices, and some fruit now. I grow my own
Yep.
bell peppers. So I've always had a garden.
For my
Something
acre and
everybody
a
should do.
third of it is complete is wetlands, and
Yeah.
a third of it is wetlands and forest. And then the remaining acre is a mixture of cultural native plants that we do, and then we have 6 hives that we run. We do have some grass in the back, but we tend to let that go as long as we can. And we have huge areas of our property that we obviously are very viable, but we haven't built anything on them. We got our shed and stuff like that. And we got a fire pit. My wife put this horrible freaking pool out there, but beyond that, we have frog. Like, it's amazing how many critters live in my backyard.
Yeah.
I end up hitting them with a lawnmower when I have to go out there, and I feel terrible about it. But
Right.
that's
Like,
what
I'll go and
conservatives
collect the
did.
lizards. I'll go collect the lizards from around the yard, and I'll bring them over to the garden area. And the males figure it out, and they end up with their own little harem there. But they'll go around and they eat all the pests pretty much.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the fucking ants are farmers. They will herd aphids wherever they want to get honeydew. And the first mistake you can make is spraying ant killer without finding a way to get rid of the aphids first, because the only reason the aphids stay at a stable population is because the ants kill the extras, which is something I found out the hard way one year. Hilariously.
That's what conservatives do, though, right? Like we own land, we take care of the land, we try to improve the land. Obviously, some of that is for property value,
Yeah,
right? I'm
stewardship,
not going to lie.
like
There's
the
some
actual
personal,
understanding of
the,
what real stewardship is.
Like
right,
that people are going to live on the land after you're done with it.
right.
You
At
can't
the
crumple it
end
up
of the
and throw it
day,
away.
if I was to be offered a decent job in the area of New Hampshire that I like to go, we will go buy 10, 15 acres out there, and the
Yeah.
majority of that's just going to be kept forest, right? Maybe we'll do full homesteading. Maybe. I struggle with killing critters. I really do. Morally,
But it does suck.
I am a meat eater, but it makes me feel bad every time.
So it's something that I suggest. It's something that, like, at least doing fishing is important. Every kid growing up needs to
Yep.
go through the experience of killing the food they eat to learn what it
Yep.
means
I agree.
to kill to eat and not kill to make waste.
Yep.
It really humbles you. It puts in perspective your position in the food chain, and it also gets you to recognize that if you're going to survive, you need to take like that. But at the same time, you don't need to take unnecessarily. There's a limit to which you should stop at before you become a gluttonous, crazy piece of shit. And then you have some kid fed high fructose corn syrup their whole life that grows up and eats everything they see.
And they live in a city, right, which is an ecological dead zone that is host to cockroaches, rats, and pigeons, which are just rats with wings. At the end of the day, like I don't think the environmental movement has always been largely conservative. You look at Teddy Roosevelt, like we have done things, we have made
national
mistakes
parks.
for sure. But I am a big fan. One of the reasons I went into nuclear power was I thought it was a solution to all of our ecological problems.
Yeah. One of the reasons I looked at hydrogen power with the polymer processing was because that's where Department of Transit's going, and that's also, I think, going to be a logical chemical store of energy to get to for bang for buck.
That's correct. We've talked about hydrogen before. I think off the show, but I'm in the same boat. You need fixed power generation for like your houses and shit where it's not moving. That is, electricity is the most efficient form of energy storage and not storage, but most efficient form of transmission. But at the same time, we have large swaths of the country that need to be traveled over, and that's never going to be done with batteries, right? You can't just take a fucking giant weight and carry it around everywhere you go with 1/600th of the energy supply per unit mass. That's just not viable.
And certainly, we're not going to end up having an entire nation of bumper car streets. We're not going to have the ground in the.
Well, hold on. We might just do those solar roadways. Come on now.
Oh my god, it's so painful to watch those videos.
That was a true high point for Thunderfoot. It truly was.
Yeah, until he made his 80th video on it.
Well, and then 2016 happened.
A word in public. I have to debunk everything again. Watch this 70-minute video.
It really surprised me with the solar roads thing that there were people who actually bought into it.
Solar freaking roadways, man.
Probably.
But you can see the premise, right? You can see the premise. I understand. It's just that it didn't work.
And kind of can't with current technology, but yeah.
I understand the premise, but at the same time, you don't even need to have completed your bachelor's degree in engineering to explain at least 10 reasons why it's not technically feasible to do what they do.
Right. The
I
first
mean,
one being
just
that
a
panels
reality.
break. You'd be out
Panels
there every
break.
You'd be out there every fucking day replacing a 10-foot section of solar panel per mile. Like
Well, I mean, even if you could get it completely stable, the scatter of the actual solar panels physically require basically they need lines hitting them for incident rays in order to trigger the electron ejection in the material. If you have scatter from fucking a glass thing that's got 18 wheelers driving over it that's going to be scattering, and there's
with
no way
dust
that's
on
going to be
it.
clear at the end of the day.
Dust and dirt
right?
and all that kinds of shit.
Yeah, and then on top of that, you're also going to have these panels set back into the road, which means they're not actually getting their entire surface area exposed at any given time of the day. I mean, I understand what they were arguing. I understand what
if you got enough,
the appeal
if you
is,
have
but
enough sand.
But that's not. It's not sand though, right? Like you have to grow.
Yeah, I know. I just saying, like, it's so stupid. Oh man, yeah. But then Thunderfoot had to turn into Thunderfag, and unfortunately, a good example, that water bottle that the quote, what was it, solar water bottle, whatever. No, the one that pulled in moisture from the air with the
the miniature dehumidifier.
The space, basically, yeah, the solid state think catalysis, but on a physical property scale, not a chemical scale here. But the technology was 100% sound. There was multiple peer-reviewed publications on exactly the topic with exactly that material, and Thunderfoot misread the abstract and then went off on a series of fucking videos about it.
Well, I mean, people
you fucking misread the last line of the abstract, and you were just wrong. Like, it literally would work.
I don't fault him for that. I really don't fault him for that. I mean,
well, he misrepresented them. He misread the paper, and then he was just wrong. And then he wouldn't back away from it.
Let me offer this. From my perspective, I tried to do a YouTube channel at one time that was going to be SciComm. And SciComm is exceptionally difficult to do.
It is.
Especially with any sort of regular content. Because if you are a scientist or an engineer or somebody who actually knows what the fuck you're doing, you understand what it takes to know something. And I think the first video that I ever did was 37 minutes long, right? And it was on a 32-page paper that I read. Right. Well, actually, it was actually on a news article that I eventually dug into a 32-page paper. But it took me 60 hours to put together a 37-minute video. Now, obviously, this was what I was just starting out with, so I have no viewership, no nothing.
Sure.
And you realize very, very quickly that the amount of content that you can produce for SciComm is like nothing. You can produce almost the amount of effort and time and energy that it takes to do a real good SciComm show is significantly greater than the amount of content that you produce. And so getting to a point where you talk something like Thunderfoot, where he's going off on, however many videos he did on solar roads and why they're going to fucking fail, I understand and empathize with the guy, because it is really, really fucking hard to pick up a completely new topic, go through the papers, the relevant papers and materials. He's going to spend 60 hours to produce a 30-minute video, right? It is easier to, I'm not saying that it's not a grift, right? He went for a grift.
Right. But the point still sounds, I mean, I'll say this.
Harder.
Like a 2-hour live stream or podcast where someone throws a paper at me, that's like a 2-hour live stream or podcast. It's done at the end. You could rehash the topic later, but it's not a well-prepared, organized, condensed form. It's like 2 hours.
It's correct.
And it's probably not just on the one thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we do.
Thanks for listening.
This is infinitely easier than doing what he was doing at the time, which was producing YouTube videos.
Except for Solar Roadways. I'm going to harp on that one. After 10 videos, he should have just shut the fuck up on it. We got it, dude.
Yeah, I mean, you
What do
could
you
have
do
come
for
back with
content?
another 5 minutes and like, oh, hey, they're back in the news, and just check out my old
I
videos on
still
this.
don't like them.
I mean,
I
all you
still
gotta
don't
do,
like them, and they're still wrong.
all you gotta do is hit that 8 minutes. I mean, I don't even get monetization, and I'm never gonna get it again. But you hit the 8 minute mark, you're in the good. You don't have to do 30 minutes. And oh my God, that man has such a fucking hate boner for Elon Musk. It's astounding.
Yeah, he does. I think he sees
understand
himself
why.
as Elon Musk, and he's wondering where his billions of dollars are.
I could
I don't think
kind
so.
of get
So
that,
so
but not
there's a
really.
lot of people. There's a lot of people, and I'm not far off. I'm not a particular fan of Elon Musk. I really am not, and it's not because I'm jealous or anything like that. I think that he sells
He named his
fictional
kid a
technology
serial
to
code.
rich people.
He named his kid a
Yes,
fucking barcode number. I mean,
So,
but
so what you're saying, Elon
his
Musk is a
whole
little bit
shtick.
of a sharper image kind of deal, basically?
yeah, that's he's what is it, Brookstone? That's what he fucking is.
Okay,
He
okay,
sells
fair, yeah.
fancy gadgets in custom packages to rich assholes, and he does it. He does it at a premium, and he makes money doing it, and he's
Yes,
very
he does.
very good at that. But the thing that irritates, I have no problem with Brookstone. Right? They have some fantastic products in much of the same way that Elon Musk has some fantastic products. But he's also promising, in Elon Musk's case, where I draw the line is he's promising shit that he can't deliver. Tesla's a perfect example of that. Yes, you can buy a Tesla, but there will not be a battery powered EV future. There physically cannot be. There is not enough raw materials on the planet to sit there and produce those vehicles at
Here's
the
the other
scale
thing.
that they
It's
need to
not.
produce it
It's
at.
and even if there were, the way it's produced is an ecological disaster.
Oh, no, no,
Absolutely.
no, it's not.
And
It's
they
that we can
offload
make
all
all
this
those
shit.
parts in India and China, so it won't actually affect the world.
It's a fucking
It's
in the recycling aspect for these batteries is a nightmare because you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
like
It
pull
is.
a bit out and use it in another battery. You have to do everything as if it was from scratch. You've got to react
Yep.
away the lithium, then refine it again, which is half of the
Yep.
disaster I just talked about. And then you can go ahead and make the battery, but you got to get rid of all the waste products, which basically
Yep.
goes back into the strip mined landfill you just created.
Yeah. Now, that said,
And for
electric
those,
vehicles are the future, but generator powered and grid powered electric vehicles are the future. I mean, if we're,
Well,
if we're
like
being entirely
or
honest.
no,
or
no,
or no, because
hydrogen,
batteries have
fuel cells.
yeah, it's hydrogen. So batteries
It,
have
it,
a
it, the
horrible energy density. Hydrogen is the
I have
best
gone
energy density yet.
through I have gone through every iteration of how to solve getting rid of fossil fuels, and the only viable solution is hydrogen. And here's the cool part: hydrogen can be produced today cheaper than we can pull fossil fuels out of the ground. If they
Yep.
really wanted to, they could go to if I was, and I'll pitch my company plan, right? If it was up to me, I would sit there and get an airline. I would run it just LAX to JFK, right? Cross country, because you want the
Right.
thing that burns the most fuel, the most expensive flight path that you can have. And if you were to sit there and run that on hydrogen, you'd be saving on that flight a huge dollar value per seat. You could save everybody
Yep.
$20 a seat and have the most upgraded plane there is in existence, and you would still pocket more than all of the rest of those companies that are doing it. And that's how I would do it.
Absolutely.
But the problem that you have with hydrogen is getting the scale, and that's what Elon solved using Teslas. He said, "Oh well, everybody's got electricity. We can charge that, so we'll do an
So
EV that way." But the
the
problem
fun
is that
thing with
doesn't
the
solve.
hydrogen, just the fun thing with the hydrogen is if you're talking about a flight in an airplane, you can retrofit ICE engines. That's redundant. You can
Yes,
retrofit internal combustion engines to run on hydrogen, and
yes, you can.
you get back from the thermo of it. You get back most of the voltage loss that you would otherwise have suffered on that.
Oh,
Yep.
not only that, you
If
can
you go,
actually do some very This is something I've studied up a bit on myself because I have a plan to eventually turn my Scooby into a hydrogen car. But I
Yeah,
just want to run it on hydrogen gas and just combust the
right.
fucking gas. which, from my understanding, you can get numbers in the vicinity of nitromethane that way.
That's the really cool part about hydrogen, and this is the thing that is fascinating to me. If I was to start a car company, I would call it fucking Edison, because fuck Tesla, right? and that would be my car company. It would be Edison. It'd be EVs, but EVs wouldn't be the only thing that I would have. I would actually have a car that is produced as an internal combustion engine, and I would actually have it be switchable between hydrogen and regular gas, because you can burn both of those in the engine, and all you'd have to do is run a switch, and you just need to add a fuel tank for hydrogen, which is not particularly difficult to do. You'd have another branch that's going to be your fuel cells, and you do a financing package where somebody because if the biggest thing with fuel cells is their power plant is very expensive, but it doesn't decay or die away. It's all catalysis. Right. It's very, very, like, you can use them forever. And so somebody comes
there's
into
actually
your
a
Edison
polymer
and
membrane.
They buy your car.
Good.
Well, I'm saying that if you come into Edison, you buy the car, and then you turn around and you get to the point where you have a little bit more money. Well, here's an upgraded model of the car, and all we'll do is swap out your engine, right? Or you can keep your fuel cells or add to the fuel cells or something like that. And that's how you sit there and you run that company. It would be super easy. And then you have your internal combustion line that is just there to sit there and run, for folks who can't afford the cars, instead of sitting there and selling all these cars at $80,000. That's how I would do it.
Well, yeah, and your internal combustion engines can run on any pretty much current gasoline, right. E85 to whatever.
Put out there, if you're looking at the kind of membranes, the PEMs, for the catalysis aspect of things here, Nafion is a polymer, NAFION, that is used. I think it's a polyamide. It's like special Kapton, right? And that's commonly used for the hydrogen cells these days. And so that was something I had to do I had to deal with that stuff for a course, and then the kids in the lab, the undergrads, kids, they one of their projects was running a hydrogen cell and evaluating it for performance. So that was interesting to see one of those things actually in operation. They have to run around 50C to get the kind of most bang for buck out of them. But they run really well at 50C.
That's not really tremendously hot.
It isn't. Yeah, it's not a huge delta T and good insulation on your system. That kind of heat is also is generated as part of the catalysis, and it also helps warm up the hydrogen.
Yep. It's really like EVs are fantastically hydrogen fuel cells are a fantastic way to go about it. But I would absolutely be running a company that, if I was to start a hydrogen company, my hydrogen company would be powered by internal combustion engines to start, because they're cheaper, a hell of a lot cheaper.
Well, not only that, it's an incredibly mature technology.
It's an incredible. I would say that the arguments you're making here are becoming more and more true of hydrogen cells as well. They're definitely not as expensive as they used to be. They're still expensive because they're not used by everyone, but they could benefit from scale.
The difference between the two is an ICE and hydrogen can be used in an ICE. Hydrogen or gasoline could be used interchangeably,
they've got to be tuned separately. If you change out for hydrogen,
yes and no, but that's not.
You have to have a separate tune.
You can tune to run both. But it's not.
Well, all you need is a sensor and an ECU that can handle it.
The only difference is your cycles per second. The only thing you're dealing with is RPM. That's the only difference between the two.
Yeah, and you got to deal with your fuel air mixture, your cycles per second.
Yeah, that's done with your cycles per second.
Well, that's really not a big deal. That's in the same vein of getting a car that can run, flex fuel. essentially.
Well, yeah,
If I turn
your
around,
valve tensioning,
if I turn
10%
around and I
ethanol is
put
way
on
different.
a little button, if I put on a button on the steering wheel that says select your fuel type, and you just pulled up to a petrol station, you select petrol, right? I hate. Why am I saying petrol? Seriously, what the fuck?
Did you get the
gas
jab?
station. I don't know. Maybe it makes you fucking British. Maybe just associating with you two makes me want to distance myself from the USA. So you go to a gas station,
we
you
don't
fill
want
up
you
with
here
gas,
anyway,
you go to a
America.
hydrogen. You go to a hydrogen station, you fill up with hydrogen. The only difference you need between the two, realistically, in terms of how your engine operates, is to choose the two, and the computer will automatically be able to adjust the fuel air mixtures,
The thing I was
because
getting to
every
with the tuning
cycle
is
of
that
the fucking pistons only draws in a certain amount of oxygen, so you know what the reaction is going to be.
Well, here, this is the thing I was kind of alluding to, is that, you know, we're further down the tech tree, if you will. The button idea is not so implausible anymore, because a car computer today is basically a little Linux box.
Oh, you should see what
Like,
Motec and some of the aftermarket ones are doing. Like Holly makes one right now that you can run. You can have a car that's got an E89 tune, not an E89, just a regular 89 octane tune, and an E99 tune, and we'll run them both with just the sensors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you'll have to have tubing that can handle it and all of that. But I mean, it's entirely doable.
That is the overwhelming majority of your engine is not your goddamn fuel tank to the other thing. Like, you go under some cars, and I'm not saying that I would target the people who are buying the fucking Suzuki miniature what the fucks that barely fits 4 people, right? I'd probably be aiming at the Subaru Outback crowd, right? The folks who need to go off-roading. That would be the market that I'd aim for. And those cars, I've been under them. You got enough room for a secondary fuel tank. You really do.
Oh, sure.
And so
here's the thing: hydrogen is So the thing with hydrogen is you wouldn't have. So the tank geometry is different. It is definitely going to be a cylindrical tank.
Well, it's a pressure vessel, so
it is
just the way it is.
Pressure vessel. It is not just a pressure vessel. It is a high pressure vessel, way higher.
Okay, yeah. It is a high pressure vessel.
You can have non-cylindrical tanks. It's just very difficult.
Yeah, you could have a Taurus. That's basically a
or
cylinder.
If you really wanted to have a square, you could have a square. Granted.
So anyway, the
gotta have a lot of fucking reinforcement.
Look, I've had to do the math on this. I've had to do the math on this, and trust me, a square is not a good idea.
I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm saying it can be done. We can physically make square tanks if we really wanted to. There's no fucking good reason to. That's a different point.
Okay, well, fair enough.
But the point here is that finding the extra space for the tank, I don't think is going to be as difficult as you might otherwise suspect. With the idea, with a normal tank geometry in mind, you can fit cylinders in odd spaces, and it still kind of counts as a crush volume. Though, I really wish that we would be able to use helium instead. That way, when you had a car accident, it would be a hell of a lot funnier.
They'd be
just before everyone asphyxiates and dies, at least they sound funny.
But hydrogen is actually a very viable technology. It's something that we could absolutely implement today. The key thing, the biggest problem that you have is that the initial investment in production of hydrogen. We can produce hydrogen cheaper than we can gasoline today, significantly cheaper than we can produce gasoline today. But then you have to sit there and build up the network and all the other stuff. So what you have to do... And here's something I have to add on to that
with gasoline. Gasoline is a loss leader for the petrochem industry.
Yeah, we've actually talked about this, and it's a really good point. Yes, I mean, we're burning really good product.
Here's the thing. Even if we're not using it as a chemicals feedstock for something like polymer synthesis, even if we're just burning the natural gas that comes out the top, that is more efficient, like by a lot, than burning the octane-rich gas in a car. So even if we just use that as the basis for generating the energy required to make the hydrogen. That's still more efficient than producing gasoline. So that's what we should be. I mean, plus we got all the natural gas coming out of the Ohio Basin area still, and you can just do the reverse water shift gas reaction and the synthesis gas reaction to get yourself your hydrogen and to consume the produce the CO2, but you can bring it back in from the reverse water gas shift.
And we can actually, with hydrogen, we can actually still use the existing infrastructure that we have with minimal modification.
Oh yeah,
and just
great deal.
Bleed in a small amount of hydrogen as we build out a hydrogen network. Like hydrogen is one of those things. If you bring in nuclear,
so here's one of the crazy things that is critically important to the discussion that an environmentalist you'd think would be salivating over. If you use the water gas shift type reactions, nuclear energy produces the energy requirement. You no longer need to bring in something like raw methane from scratch. You can harvest CO2 from the air if you're worried about that as an issue for global warming, whatever. You can harvest CO2 from the air and close loop it under these circumstances. You can produce the feedstocks required for the water gas shift reaction minus the water. You just get that from the ocean or whatever. You can produce the feedstock using the nuclear energy and basically a glorified microwave oven. You just, with a little bit of pressure and temperature adjustments, you get methane all the way up to octane. We've actually been in the position, we had the technology, and a Tyson chicken plant was the pilot of all things, to turn chicken meat into, like, leftover chicken bits into usable gasoline. But the same exact
I remember this.
That's 2004.
Amazing.
I remember this. Yeah, so
the same exact technology can pull CO2 from the air, and so it can close loop CO2. At which point, an environmentalist has nothing to bitch about anymore.
The goal of the technology that he's talking about was originally supposed to be implemented as an alternative to trash, because it could, in theory, be used with any hydrocarbon source and would automatically break it down into its resulting constituents, and you'd actually get the waste stream for the minerals, and you'd have the hydrocarbon turned into some form of syngas.
So here's the problem that came about from this. The break-even price point was about $4 a gallon at the time, which was about twice the cost of gas at the time. And the break-even with 10-year payback period on the fixed investment was about $4.50 a gallon for at least 20 years. We actually are at that point anyway.
Yep.
So we are doing that because people are upset by it. Just the way it is.
Well, and this is one of the things that is also fascinating about the argument. So for those who remember back to 2004, back in 2004, the left was arguing peak oil, and they were trying to blame peak oil on the sudden rise in gas prices, which was largely due to some federal restrictions in drilling, which were under Bush, as well as
and blowing up the Middle East,
Hurricane Katrina, and
that whole thing.
That too.
Well, there were WMDs over there.
There was a series of actual. For those of us who are in chemical engineering, in the late 2000s, that would be both Craig and I. One of the interesting things that they were talking about pretty extensively was they were kind of salivating at these prices because it meant that we could start implementing technologies that were ready to basically give us whatever.
They're off the shelf. They're off the fucking shelf.
Yeah, they were off the shelf.
It wasn't just give us whatever. It was give us whatever, but actually ever. You know, the material, the mineral stream that comes out the bottom, the syngas, which we can nuke into octane if we want.
Yep.
Any pharmaceutical basis feedstock that's aliphatic was there. It was a straight chain hydrocarbon.
Yep. My capstone so for those who aren't familiar, engineers typically have a capstone project. It is you basically build a plant. It's supposed to be done as a group project. I did mine solo. I was an idiot, and
Oh, I feel so bad for you. That had to suck.
I got really mad. So the first group that I had was two girls. One of
Oh
them
boy.
was the salutatorian for the
Yeah.
class, and she pissed
Okay.
me off royally because she A, didn't know anything, and B, like basically spent the entire time while we were trying to solve the problems on Facebook. It
Oh,
Oh
fun.
was
my
super
god.
irritating. She was hot, so I'm pretty sure that she just hooked up with an engineer who knew what the fuck he was doing, and
Yeah,
uh,
and then
and
yeah.
that was not me. So I was just mad.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah,
Okay.
I decided to do
Honesty,
my
folks.
capstone alone. I I either got an incomplete on that, or I think that class I got a D on. That's one of the only classes I got a D on. I mentally imploded after that whole
Oh
thing.
man, that
That was fucking
so,
terrible.
so for people who are listening, my capstone project, we had what was it, 6 of us? Like the group size was like 6 people. No, here's the thing: is we had to produce a product using 2 different plant technologies. So it was basically like 3 or 4 of us working on one planet. Like, so I was kind of in charge of. We were producing acetaldehyde from either acetic acid or ethanol, and we
Mm.
were required to use the Wacker process for the one. And I went ahead and I was in charge basically of that one. And then the other one was whichever we wanted, but we had to we had to go through the selection process, selection matrices, all that kind of jazz, to pick which reaction we would go with. So basically, everyone more or less got to the point where they're using the Wacker process and then some form of ethanol conversion. And like the Wacker process is not feasible. That's basically the point of the project is to fuck with the students like that. So my group, the only group that the professor I had, only group he ever gave a 100 to on their final report.
Hmm. Oh,
We
bravo.
we
Mine
solidly aced that shit.
mine was the 2010 AICHE
Uh
project
huh.
proposal, which
Mm-hmm.
was the premise was that an oil and gas company in the Middle East has a
Okay.
has a well, an operating natural gas well, and they were trying to evaluate whether it would be more cost effective to run a Fischer-Tropsch process
Okay.
on
Yeah.
the natural gas production or to pipeline it out. And so you ended up having to capture the different streams from the Fischer-Tropsch process all the way up. And I got all the way through I tried to do Aspen, but Aspen was only available on site. The college,
Ooh.
because I was a Canadian student, I was only allowed to be on college until 10 p.m. So I ended
Okay.
up starting to try to work at home on this shit. And then I tried to use like ChemCAD, but I had pirated versions. It didn't work so well.
Right.
And so Aspen is difficult to use at best.
It is. It's a so
Hmm.
at the now it's here's the funny thing. It's the funny thing. I got to grad school. Aspen completely redesigned the front end and updated their code base, so it was no longer
Really?
so it was no longer a 7.5 hour long series of batch files running to install the motherfucker. Instead, it
Oh
fucking
my
works
god.
like magic. It's like opening up Word. It just fucking works. It's
Huh.
insane.
Are you
It's night and
serious?
day.
God damn.
Yes, they actually fixed it. I got my first class I was TA for was process design, and so I'm
Oh,
sitting there. I was told, oh, we're gonna install Aspen on this weekend. I was like, oh god, that means it's gonna be horrible. All I had to do was download a hard disk file, basically make a VM, and it was there and it was beautiful. And then I had to install it separately a different time, and it took like 30 minutes.
wow.
Now, like half of that was
Yeah.
because I forgot to go to my computer to
I
press a button.
for my capstone, I
That sounds
couldn't get to
incredibly
Aspen
painless.
because they locked me out. They didn't have the licenses available by the school
Oh my
VPN.
god.
And so
So these things
I
require a
pirated
server
ChemCAD.
license. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Believe that.
downloaded ChemCAD, and ChemCAD is nowhere near as advanced as Aspen. So I realized very, very quickly that that was A, learning that interface, and B, trying to get it to work completely failed. So because I couldn't stay on campus without getting ticketed, so I couldn't use Aspen, and then because I couldn't use ChemCAD, I said fuck it and did my entire project in MATLAB. And I wrote
Oh my god.
some hundreds. It had to be 500 some odd lines of do loops and for loops, and like I made this. So you're like,
people listening aren't understanding like how painful this definitely was. When you have a recycle line in a plant, so whenever you create a closed feedback loop, even if you have like a bleed stream and so on, you don't just like know how much stuff is circulating around in that loop. That is an iterative procedure to figure out what the fuck's going on in that.
Yep, that's exactly right.
You have to converge every piece of process equipment that is inside that loop. Everything. Yep. And so, like, my Whacker process PFD had like three or four different loops set up, and then I had different loops inside of different like compound columns, etc. Doing any of that shit by hand would have been horrible. Like, so if you're starting from scratch in MATLAB, like, you've got to be able to do like the inside out. I'm guessing you did inside out on your columns, which is fucking
we didn't
awful.
Actually have to do. We didn't have to do it to that level, right? So this is the interesting bit. They rate limited, so they gave some design parameters, so it wasn't like a strict go figure it out entirely on your own.
It's a retrofit, right?
No, it's not a retrofit. It was design, full design.
All right.
But they said, this is the shell and tube you can get. This is your catalytic converters. This is the input feed volume.
They said, here's your equipment.
Here's the equipment. Here's the maximum scale that you can get it at. And so I had to code every single heat exchanger that we put it in, and then I'd have to do a for loop that would calculate out the most profitable streams, in series, and then I'd have one in parallel, and it would have two iterated for loops. It took like 6 hours to run my fucking MATLAB program, because it would have to do the differential on the Fischer-Tropsch process, and it would have to run that differential.
Unoptimized in the back end too. Like
there is no optimization.
Like, Aspen is running heavily optimized C code in the background, that compiled C code, like very heavily optimized to get this shit done quickly. So my thing, which I'm gathering at this point was a lot more complicated, took still like 45 minutes to converge, but that's only 45 minutes. You're talking about like 6 hours. So this is your dev. This is the minimum time on your dev cycle is what this boils down to. So if you've got a bug or if you got a bad answer at the end, this is the minimum amount of time before you can fix it and figure out what you did wrong and hopefully learn from it and make new mistakes.
Wow. That's
So he got to make 6 mistakes a day. Oh my god.
So I started inserting print loops into my do loops to figure out where the fuck it, because that was the first problem that I ran into. I'm like, I can't fucking wait 6 hours to figure out whether it worked or not.
Right.
Like,
I'm guessing you did the resolution debug where you start off with one less 0 than you actually care about, and then you go, okay, now it kind of works. I'll go for the next one.
No, I actually didn't do that. So the way I did it was I had every. No, I don't think so. I don't think that was that bad.
You would know better on this than I would.
The way I ended up debugging it, because it had so many nested loops and so many equations, was I would run each equation in a single run. Okay. And I would just work my way up in terms of runs to make sure it's actually outputting it. But yeah, I would have to store and calculate the values for everything. It was like super expensive to do. I got a ridiculous... The biggest problem is that some of these things you get a ridiculous number of reactors, right? And you're like, I have no idea whether this is rational or not.
Well, it's you sit there, like the thing you sit there and you look at it, it's like, all right, well, with this many reactors, it will definitely work this well with this thing. And you think, all right, now this many reactors times this much metal per reactor. Just like not even worried about floor space. Just like, all right, how many pounds of steel do I need?
Yep.
And then you can sometimes.
It was.
Yeah.
It was
an example of this was a tower in the Wacker process from one group. So everybody had to be like, all right, give it your best shot, and then when that fails inevitably, some groups, most people were encouraged to then figure out what would it take to actually make it work. And one group, when they found out that it was flat out not going to fucking work, they wanted to get to a glacial acetic acid, I think it was. They wanted to get like an actual split acetic acid and water. It's really hard because there's an asymptotic pinch at the top end of that. So what this means is it goes towards an infinite number of plates needed, like an infinitely tall column. So what they did to get to glacial acetic acid, they had a column that was it was like 200 trays tall at like 400 feet, I think it was, and it was like a mile and a half in diameter.
Okay.
And it would cost $2 billion.
Oh, that's all.
Using the was it Capcom? Not whatever the fuck it was. A price estimator. Just put it like that. It was a way of estimating a price. For your
capital. Oh, what the fuck is that called?
Cap something.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, though. Yeah, with the yellow book,
right? I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So the cost estimator on that for that column was $2 billion. This is, by the way, it has market data built into it from a certain time period, a relevant time period, and then
you have to sit there and calculate it for current day.
But so here's the thing: is that $2 billion value is what we call an extreme extrapolation, because nobody's gonna build a column that wide. So, like the amount of it clearly was using like a reasonable estimator in the rational realm.
If someone were crazy enough to actually do this, it would roughly cost this much and be this many materials.
Right, but when you get out to like a mile and a half in diameter, $2 billion is no longer that's probably missing a couple zeros.
Yeah, you're looking into all sorts of things.
Keep in mind, this was 2011, 2010.
Well, by the time you get out to a mile and a half in diameter, your internal structure requires its own supporting structures.
Right. I mean, let's just be clear here. A lot of the downcomers probably had to actually contact the plate below them.
Yep.
Like they're probably all just support struts at that. So obviously no one built any of this kind of shit. But it was just hilarious because, like, all right, now that we've established that the process is a failure and we had to use the other one, here's what it would require to make the thing work. And it's basically just a lot of the regular process stuff around this big motherfucker right here.
Yeah.
That would make a statement, though, to basically have a giant metal chode in the middle of your plant, wouldn't it?
It would indeed.
A mile and a half in diameter.
Yeah, that's really something.
I think, I'm trying to remember, so we had, I can't remember what my because I had to run 2 for loops, one in series and one in parallel. And in order to make it work, it was going to be like, in order to make it profitable, it had to be like 200 units by like 100 units or something like that. And they're like 20-foot shell and tube,
holy shit,
catalytic exchangers. Yeah, it was fucking massive.
Yeah, I mean,
I wrote
that you'd have to do so. You could probably do pinch analysis on that and find out the optimal failure positions, and then just take out those exchangers or reactors rather.
What do you mean?
Oh, so pinch integration. So when you do thermal integration, but you look for the place where you have pinch points, basically where all the streams come down to a single point of failure. and the way to optimize it is to basically duplicate the pinch point so that you parallelize streams, and then look for the optimal locations where a unit could fail, and then remove it, and then that assumes the optimal failure has already occurred, and then you basically scale up to match your demand. And if you do that, you can find out how to optimally parallelize and integrate your thermally integrate your process design. So I didn't do any pinch analysis on the plant that we made, but we probably, potentially, because we put our own cogen in, we probably could have made the process profitable. Like we pulled out all the fucking tricks.
You can just sit there and write in MATLAB 2 for loops, one that does it in series and the other one that does it in parallel. And thus, you just run it from iteration, I equals 1 to I equals 10,000 on both of them. That's how it takes 10 fucking
and make a big ass number. So people, what you should listen here and what you should be getting from this is the difference between n log n and n squared. That's basically what it comes down to. And 10,000 is when n matters. Between n squared and n log n.
10,000 is when n is what you put in just so that you can go take a fucking nap.
Right. Dude, so here's the funny thing. When I was doing my NASA work, same kind of shit was hitting me, because the software I was working with, the software that it would compile, so you could do user-defined functions, and I needed to do that to implement the rheology of the material, and it would compile the C code and run the C code, and the way it did not tell you what the errors were if there was a failure to compile. There was the dev cycle for me on that it varied between like hours and days for a while, until I figured out how to find the library headers I needed and compile that shit on my own and bring my dev cycle down to like 2 minutes. Or whatever. So like for a couple of months, I was stalled just trying to get off the ground with that fucker.
Yep.
So I can appreciate the pain you had there, but 6 hours sucks.
And don't get me wrong, like, again, I like mentally imploded. I seriously did.
Right.
That's understandable.
I did finish the project. I did finish the project, but I completely, like, apparently my wife found me on the floor, curled up, sitting there and talking gibberish. I mean, it probably made very good sense to me, but she said it was gibberish. But for somebody who probably hears chemical engineers who speak in tongues anyways, it's like our natural language. Hail Satan. She found me on the floor,
Judas
like,
Priest
rocking
backwards.
back and
Then if you play a Judas Priest record backwards, then you hear a bunch of chemical engineers telling you to play it the fuck forwards.
Yeah. So there was a bit of a pause there, but yeah, that was my dev cycle. I did finally finish that code. That was brutal. So I would never ever recommend doing Capstone alone, ever.
Capcost was the name of the program. Capcost.
Is that the name of the program?
That was it. It just came to me earlier when we were talking, and it's Capcost. Yes. In the process design book, the yellow one that every chemical engineer is groaning about right now, if they're listening to this, in the far-flung future, if anyone else are listening.
Yeah, who knows?
In days of our podcast.
The early days. Back before we ran everything.
The days the SJWs were listening to see if we besmirch the Chipmunks in Steve's backyard.
Listen.
Blessed be their names.
As long as you don't misgender my Chipmunks, it's okay.
Dude, put that shit on a shirt. Don't misgender my Chipmunks.
That's actually a pretty good shirt idea. Not gonna lie. I'm pretty keen on that one. If I had the money to spare, I might be
No,
convinced.
hey. Remember I told you about Zazzle earlier?
Oh, there you go.
I showed you the cards I put on there. I showed you the shirt. You can make one yourself. It's actually free to set that shit up.
Yeah, I'll retweet it, man. Go for it.
Don't misgender my chipmunks.
I won't even ask for a cut.
Fine, fuck it, I'll make it.
Sure, I'll.
Yeah, one of you two better get to it quickly.
Well, I'm drunk and I gotta go to work tomorrow. So.
Oh well, that's fair.
Yeah. I will.
Well, if I get anything more than like $5, then I will be shipping you your cut. All 1% of it.
Thank you.
Up to 50%.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Very generous.
I think it's your idea, sir. So I will go with that.
Royalties.
I would do it. I honestly would do it if I did. Unfortunately I got to enjoy the lovely state of New Hampshire, the free state of New Hampshire, last weekend, and so I have to finish moving my cube downstairs. My boss was like, "Hey, you want to come downstairs, don't you?" I'm like, "No, I don't. No, I don't. Not at all. Not in any way."
Oh my god, that sucks.
Oh, joy of joys. Well, to finish...
I have a shirt on I have a hat on my store that says Steve Shabs blocked me. That's old.
Damn.
Speaking
oh, yeah, that is an old meme. Still true, though.
Stuff. Kreggles, did you actually respond to that chick on LinkedIn?
I haven't yet. It's on my to-do list. It is on my list.
And since we've really gotten kind of off the rails
She's pestering me.
And esoteric here.
Excellent.
Well, that's a good sign for you. So good luck. But I will end with a very interesting and happy yeehaw note. Bitcoin right now, 59,632 and wavering dollars.
Do I wish that I had had the money at the time?
Things are interesting. Things are very, very interesting.
I can't wait till I get my house, and then Biden keeps on inflating the shit out of the dollar.
Well, or Officer Harris, depending on how things play out. You know, how quickly they have to advance the timeline. I mean, they're making him into one of the most hated things that's ever drawn breath on the face of the earth. And, I mean, that's really quite an impressive achievement, considering how utterly detestable the man is in the first place, So there you have it. Anyway, make sure and bookmark wherever you're watching this. Subscribe, what have you. Anchor.fm/thatfakeguy Dan, I think. Or the Fake Untitled... Well, it's the Fake Untitled podcast on everything. And it'll be listed on Anchor as... Yeah, it is. Anchor.fm/thatfakeguy Dan. And of course, look me up at That Fake Guy Dan everywhere except Facebook. You can find Craig at CraigBob99 just about everywhere. And you can find Steve at Ratman720. And he's being a little bit more active on social media these days, so there's a chance you could get a reply. Beyond that, if you've got any questions, any ideas, you want a Discord invite, or anything else related to the show, feel free to hit me up, or Craig for that matter. Either one of us can get you into the Discord. And definitely, let us know if there's anything you think we can do to improve the show, concepts, ideas, guests, whatever. Let me know. Thanks. Talk to you soon.